Hello. Oh yeah, that's right. Go Vikings. Skål Vikings. With a big playoff victory. Coming in, Adam Thielen with a clutch reception for the touchdown. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Let me just turn this music down so I can say a proper hello. Got my jams on full blast. Thanks for joining me, everyone. We are, of course, here to talk about the one and only Daenerys Targaryen, not football. But, yes, no, I'm a Vikings fan, so I had to get a little something in here. Oh, yes. And joining me on the show today is the one and only All the Bards. Say hello.
Hello, everybody. I was chuckling really hard because you started off in kind of like a Swedish-ish sounding accent, and then it turned Irish there at the end, and it delights me just how bad you are.
Really hoping we weren't going to put all that under the microscope, Gretchen.
I can't help it. It's funny.
I was hoping with the music high that those little cultural inconsistencies would be okay. Anyway, so is that a Jamaican accent? Yeah.
There was like a little bit of Jamaican
really should.
in there,
I'm not good at doing any sort of serious accent. Only like ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous accents. But
yes,
let's it's all fun and games on the live show, but people are going to watch us on the replay and be like, "Come on." Well, I clicked on this to talk about Dany, so let's talk about Dany. We are here to talk about the one and only Daenerys Targaryen. If you joined us last 2 weeks ago for our first Dany stream, then we had a good time and we climbed up on our high horse and we defended the character of one and only Daenerys. Actually, no, we didn't defend. What kind of did, but I'd like to think that we took an accurate exploration into the character of Daenerys Targaryen. It just comes out as a defense because the show, let's say it did her wrong. I mean, that's kind of why we're here. If you're here and you think that the ending of Daenerys Targaryen on the show was awesome, then you might have a bad time because we're going to look in the books and we're going to talk about basically the foreshadowing and the character of Daenerys Targaryen and how it is not building towards Dany becoming a mass murderer. That's the general context here. So, Ball, say a couple words. Yeah, I know you were active in the chat last time, and I know you enjoyed the stream. We've been comparing notes on Dany a lot because you've been working on Dany. But why don't you say a few words about what you've been working on, and in particular, you've got that cool thing. You can mention the SW. It's okay.
Oh, Star Wars.
You're doing the Dany Ray.
I am. I'm writing a piece for the website that I am managing editor for, which is called the Fandomentals, and I am writing a piece comparing Rey and Dany, and specifically the ways that both The Rise of Skywalker and Game of Thrones kind of did them dirty. I mean, clearly Dany is the worst. I mean, clearly she suffers more than Rey does, but there are some similar issues where the scripting of them went wrong in the most recent Star Wars movie and in Game of Thrones. So I'm going to be writing about that. Things like, go crazy because bad blood, or might be evil because, genes. Hey, or like the lack of foreshadowing for why should I be afraid that Rey would, suddenly want to be a Sith Lord? She's never wanted to be a Sith Lord, kind of like Dany's never wanted to burn King's Landing. So yeah, it'll be fun talking about that. It's been productive.
Yeah, it's pretty much as soon as you told me you were doing that, I was like, oh yes, I could definitely see some parallels there. So look forward to that. And of course, you're also gestating a Dance of the Dragons masterwork, if you will.
I am. With the move, I have gotten less done than I thought that I would, but I am going to be doing some work on Dance of Dragons and specifically comparing, well, not only comparing, I want to explore the dance leading up to hopefully the prequel being released, and also talking about how I think the Dance of Dragons has got a lot of parallels to what we've seen in the book so far and could kind of give us an idea of where things might be heading for the conclusion in Winds of Winter and A Dream. So
Well, I'm very excited for that,
Yep.
not only because of all the cool parallels to the potential end game, and you know that I've basically turned my channel into a let's figure out what the the book ending is going to look like given the clues of the show ending, and let's figure out where they've diverged and where we might be seeing tea leaves that we can make sense of. So King Bran, for example, we know that came from George. I did a few King Bran videos to figure out what that'll actually look like in the books, be a little cooler, have a little more magic, a little more purpose for all that weird net knowledge and stuff. And then with Dany, we've got even more work to do, really, because it seems like I think Dany's ending is definitely more in the category of stuff that D&D came up with, and that really shows when you do just what we're doing now and go back and look at the stuff from her earlier chapters. And so we did a Game of Thrones last week. We had a good time. It's the first book, so of course George, like a good author, did a lot of the establishing work in that book. And a lot of the seeds are planted for what we're going to talk about today and in future books. So we've got basically two large sections that we're going to deal with today. Dany's A Clash of Kings arc actually has a lot fewer chapters than a Game of Thrones. He's only got 5 chapters, and they're basically in 2 settings. The first chapter, which is the biggest one, it's huge, is the entire Red Waste, including Vaes Toloro, that little abandoned city where they take refuge in. And it ends with the 3 travelers from Qarth appearing at the walls of Vaes Toloro, which of course are Quaeve and Zarzo and Daxos and Pyat Pri the Warlock. And so then her 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th chapters are basically all in Qarth, and she's navigating the powers that be there. She has a whole chapter in the House of the Undying, and then a chapter to go home. So essentially what we're going to do is the main topic that I found rising to the top of her Clash of Kings themes is the idea of magical destiny. In the first book, we were talking a lot about the idea of the dragon identity, what that means for Dany. And I honestly came into this reread thinking that there was going to be this conflict between the Fire and Blood dragon identity on one hand and the Mysa protector identity. But as soon as we got into Game of Thrones, I realized that that's not the case, and that Dany's dragon identity basically comes to the fore. Excuse me. It basically comes to the fore when she wants to first for inner strength and resilience, and then it starts manifesting as a desire to protect other people when she starts claiming victims of war and calling them hers and protecting them. And that's going to carry over obviously all the way to her 5th book when she's freeing all the slaves and they're calling her Mysa and stuff. So that's what we saw in the first book, that Dany's dragon identity is largely tied to inner strength and the idea of protecting. And there's also the other thing that we followed was the idea of what she wants and her concept of home. And we see that this starts off with the pure idea of the house with the red door, just a place of safety, represents lost childhood, just a door that you can close, go behind that door and it'll be safe and you don't have to worry about anything. She doesn't have that. It was ripped away from her. So that's what she wants. But gradually, that desire for home seems to become merged with this desire to retake Westeros. And so now she's thinking of home as Westeros, when before it was kind of Viserys's thing that he wanted. And now she has sort of adopted that. And so in the 2nd book, we're going to see that continue. We're going to see her idea of home and destiny and Westeros continue to sort of all merge as one. But the thing that I really want to focus on is what I'm calling magical destiny. Because Daenerys, she is a chosen one figure. Like her and Jon and Bran are our 3 sort of like Christ-like figures. They have a lot of comparisons to various savior figures in mythology. They've got last hero and Azor Ahai symbolism the most strongly. And so with Dany, she's the one who's, I think, most cognizant herself of that destiny. She's got the prophecies laid on her. She's told she's the chosen one. She's told she's the last dragon. Her story starts off by, she performs the miracle of hatching the dragons. And then she's going through every hardship, and her sense of destiny begins to crystallize with this idea of I am the dragon and I'm going to take Westeros, but I'm also going to protect people and keep them safe. So that's the overview of what we're going to do today. But before we get to the whole dragon destiny, magical destiny stuff, we're going to go with some of the, I guess you'd call low-hanging fruit, the more immediate, obvious concepts, which in this book is primarily leadership and wisdom. There's a lot of leadership that Dany has to develop in A Clash of Kings, and there's a lot of traps and snares that she has to navigate. So in the first book, we talked a lot about kindness and empathy. There's still going to be some of that in this second book, but she's taking on now the mantle of leadership. And so it's a lot of determination and strength. And those are the qualities that we're going to see rising to the top. And so basically, Ball the Bard is going to be here to read the quotes and add her 2 cents. Those two things. Doing everything on my own definitely is a little bit, it's a little much. I get no breath for air. And I've been developing some of these ideas with Ball behind the scenes as we've talked about our overlapping projects. And so it seemed like a logical thing to have her on. So Gretchen, why don't you take us away with the beginning of Dany's first chapter of A Clash of Kings, which starts with the one and only Red Comet.
This was no kindly country. They left a trail of dead and dying horses behind them as they went, for Pono, Jocko, and the others had seized the best of Drogo's herds, leaving to Dany the old and the scrawny, the sickly and the lame, the broken animals and the ill-tempered. It was the same with the people. They are not strong, she told herself, so I must be their strength. I must show no fear, no weakness, no doubt. However frightened my heart, when they look upon my face, they must see only Drogo's queen. She felt older than her 14 years. If ever she had truly been a girl, that time was done.
So I apologize. I had false advertising. The comic quote is a different one. But setting that aside, what we're seeing here is that Dany is tough as nails. And she understands this idea that she's got to set the example, both in courage and in kindness. And we see more of this when she talks to Jorah and sees how downtrodden he is.
I will not lie to you. The way is harder than I dared think. The knight's face was gray and exhausted. The wound he had taken to his hip the night he fought Khal Drogo's blood riders had never fully healed. She could see how he grimaced when he mounted his horse, and he seemed to slump in his saddle as they rode. Perhaps we are doomed if we press on, but I know for a certainty that we are doomed if we turn back. Dany kissed him lightly on the cheek. It heartened her to see him smile. I must be strong for him as well, she thought grimly. A knight he may be, but I am blood of the dragon.
And so this is interesting because, you know, she's superstitious and she puts her faith in omens when it suits her, but not when it defies sense. And this is important because we're going to be following this idea that Dany kind of believes in her magical destiny, but we're going to be watching for like, well, is she getting carried away with it? And is she losing track of reality? And mostly it's going to be the answer no, as you might guess. But this is, so here's again, we see another example of her basically setting an example of courage that everyone can latch on to.
This city is dead, Khaleesi. Nameless and godless we found it. The gates broken, only wind and flies moving through the streets. Jiki shuddered. When the gods are gone, the evil ghosts feast by night. Such places are best shunned, it is known. It is known, Irri agreed. Not to me. Dany put her heels into her horse and showed them the way, trotting beneath the shattered arch of an ancient gate and down a silent street. Sir Jorah and her blood riders followed, and then, more slowly, the rest of the Dothraki. Yet they found bones, too, the skulls of the unburied dead, bleached and broken. Ghosts, Irri muttered. Terrible ghosts. We must not stay here, Khaleesi. This is their place. I fear no ghosts. Dragons are more powerful than ghosts. And figs are more important. Go with Jiki and find me some clean sand for a bath, and trouble me no more with silly talk.
So this, again, what I'm pointing out is like, when the comet is pointing the only way that she can go, she's like, oh yes, it's the comet, it's destiny. But when they get to the city of bones and everyone's like, oh no, we can't go in there. She's like, yeah, we're going in there. We need water. We have no other choice. And so it seems like, there's a little bit of belief, and there's also a little bit of using people's belief, as a leadership tool, but common sense always prevails and courage also prevails. So not only does she sort of, poo-poo the superstitious idea of ghosts, she offers a little something to believe in. She's saying dragons are more powerful than ghosts. They believe in her dragons because the dragons, like, again, that's her sign of magic, her sign of miraculous power. So she's navigating this pretty well. And what I would like to highlight is the idea of trappings of power. Okay, so this is another leadership bit that it's kind of funny to notice that Dany is like way out in front of Jon on this one. So Melisandre talks about the trappings of power in A Dance with Dragons. And we'll get to that quote in a second, but check out this one with Dany basically using symbols of power to her advantage here.
When Irri and Jiki returned with pots of white sand, Dany stripped and let them scrub her clean. Your hair is coming back, Khaleesi, Jiki said as she scraped sand off her back. Dany ran a hand over the top of her head, feeling the new growth. Dothraki men wear their hair in long oiled braids and cut them only when defeated. Perhaps I should do the same, she thought, to remind them that Drogo's strength lives within me now.
So then along the same lines, there's another quote, and actually let's not even read this one. It's basically just her having her handmaids garb her in the skin of the Harakar, the white lion, because her hair was bald and it looks fearsome. And then the dragon perches on the shoulder, and you can now picture, instead of a bald, skinny 13-year-old girl, she's a bald, skinny 13-year-old girl with a lion's pelt and a dragon on her shoulder. So these are
that's pretty badass.
Pretty badass. Yes, get on it, fan art. Let's go. I'm sure it's out there, actually. I should go dig in some good Dany fan art for, like I said, when I do at the end of all these live streams, I'm probably going to do a produced video, an edited down one, and I'll go deep into the Dany fan art well for that one. In any case, then, so in her fifth and final chapter, there's one more trappings of power quote. Dany's hair is starting to grow back. She's just burned the House of the Undying. And so Jiki puts a bell in her braid to signify this victory.
I thought that was the Melisandre quote.
No, that's later. I have won no victories.
I don't have that quote. I
no
haven't.
worries.
Do I have it?
Maybe you might want to hit refresh. It's possible. Yeah. But
sorry, folks.
No worries. So it's she says, "I have won no victories." She tried telling her handmaid when the bell tinkled softly. Jiki disagreed. "You burned the Magi in their house of dust and sent their souls to hell." That was Drogon's victory, not mine, Dany wanted to say, but she held her tongue. The Dothraki would esteem her all the more for a few bells in her hair. So again, subtle, but she kind of gets it. So go ahead and read the trappings of power Melisandre quote.
It was Jon Snow she needed, not fried bread and bacon. But it was no use sending Devon to the Lord Commander. He would not come to her summons. Snow still chose to dwell behind the armory, in a pair of modest rooms previously occupied by the Watch's late blacksmith. Perhaps he did not think himself worthy of the king's tower, or perhaps he did not care. That was his mistake, the false humility of youth that is itself a sort of pride. It was never wise for a ruler to eschew the trappings of power, for power itself flows in no small measure from such trappings. The boy was not entirely naive, however. He knew better than to come to Melisandre's chambers like a supplicant, insisting she come to him instead, should she have need of words with him. And oft as not, when she did come, he would keep her waiting or refuse to see her. That much, at least, was shrewd.
And then later in the chapter is a little more of this.
It was cold and dark beneath the ice, in the narrow tunnel that crooked and slithered through the wall. Morgan went before her with a torch, and Merrill came behind her with an axe. Both men were hopeless drunkards, but they were sober at this hour of the morning. Queen's men, at least in name, both had a healthy fear of her, and Merrill could be formidable when he was not drunk. She would have no need of them today, but Melisandre made it a point to keep a pair of guards about her everywhere she went. It sent a certain message. The trappings of power.
So there you go. Like I said, I think it's kind of funny that Dany gets this right away in the first book, and Jon has to sort of have it explained to him in the fifth book by Melisandre. Because Jon's he knows nothing. He's a little slow, but that's cool. Dany, the point. I mean, just again and again, it's just impressive, right? She's so young,
and she knows it. Like she just kind of instinctively seems to understand what it is that they do. Well, and a lot of it is because she observes. I mean, you see in a Game of Thrones that she's constantly observing her environment. So she noticed that the Dothraki valued the bells in their hair and bowed to strength. And so she understands what to protect.
There he goes. And so this Earl, because you have to think like she's trying to cobble together some sort of concept of leadership from very few pieces. Viserys showed very little, if any, leadership traits maybe determination, I guess. But other than that, he didn't teach a lot. Drogo definitely had some leadership traits, but they're Dothraki leadership traits, which are only some of those Dany can use. Other ones she can't. And so she's putting this together as she goes. And so she's figuring things out, and she gets the idea that she's got to be strong for her people. She's got to be kind to her people so that they, take the edge off. And she's got to look strong for them. And that's why the title of this one is I Must Be Their Strength. That's kind of the theme that emerged for me in this second book. So now we're going to get into specifically wisdom and perceptiveness. This is still really leadership that we're talking, but more specifically having to do with wisdom and perceptiveness. Because like I said, there's a lot of traps and snares that she has to navigate here. So when they finally come to the abandoned city of Vace Toloro, after wandering the waste, Dany shows some caution and wisdom.
The next day, dawn broke as they were crossing a cracked and fissured plain of hard red earth. Dany was about to command them to make camp when her outriders came racing back at a gallop. "A city, Khaleesi!" they cried. "A city pale as the moon and lovely as a maid, an hour's ride, no more." "Show me," she said. When the city appeared before her, its walls and towers shimmering white behind a veil of heat, it looked so beautiful that Dany was certain it must be a mirage. "Do you know what place this might be?" she asked Ser Jorah. The exiled knight gave a weary shake of his head. "No, my queen, I have never traveled this far east." The distant white walls promised rest and safety, a chance to heal and grow strong, and Dany wanted nothing so much as to rush toward them. Instead, she turned to her blood riders. "Blood of my blood, go ahead of us and learn the name of the city and what manner of welcome we should expect."
So there you go. It reminded me of actually the story of Gideon, Gretchen. It's where
right.
Gideon judged the people who drank the water in such a way that they could keep their eyes up for the enemy. And he kept those soldiers. Those were only 1 out of 10. And all the soldiers that went down and slurped out of the river like a dog, they got rejected. So it's kind of just that little bit of caution and be like, yes, we want to go and run and do this, but let's hold up. Wait. So we got Dany, there's this really clever plan that she comes up with once they're in Vace Toloro. She comes up with a stratagem, if you will, to send the 3 blood riders out in 3 different directions while the rest of her ailing Khalasar rests up at Vace Toloro.
The next morn she summoned her blood riders. "Blood of my blood," she told the 3 of them. "I have need of you. Each of you is to choose 3 horses, the hardiest and healthiest that remain to us. Load as much water and food as your mounts can bear, and ride forth for me. Ago shall strike southwest. Rakharo due south. Jogo, you are to follow Shirek Kira on the southeast." "What shall we seek, Khaleesi?" asked Jogo. "Whatever is there," Dany answered. "Seek for other cities, living and dead. Seek for caravans and people. Seek for rivers and lakes and the great salt sea. Find how far this waste extends before us and what lies on the other side. When I leave this place, I do not mean to strike out blind again. I will know where I am bound and how best to get there."
So not bad for a half-starved 14-year-old. Dany is pretty good at improvising plans on the fly. That's something I noticed kind of throughout this book. She's got a few of them. This is a pretty good one, though. So now check out the way that Dany, and this I really like, the way that she sets her people to doing constructive tasks while they wait for everybody to get back. So first we have Rakharo, who returns having found nothing.
Dany gave him charge of 12 of her strongest men and set them to pulling up the plaza to get to the earth beneath. If devil grass could grow between the paving stones, other grasses would grow when the stones were gone. They had walls enough, no lack of water. Given seed, they could make the plaza bloom.
Ago didn't find anything either, but Dany still thinks of a task for him to lead.
Dany thanked him and told him to see to the repair of the gates. If enemies had crossed the waste to destroy these cities in ancient days, they might well come again. If so, we must be ready, she declared.
So the way she puts her people to work here doing constructive things, it seems a little bit useless or silly at first because it's unlikely that they're actually going to need the gates. Like whoever destroyed the city, it happened years and years and years ago. So they're probably not going to need them. And they're probably not going to remain there long enough to harvest whatever they plant. But if you think about this, there's some strategy here because first, you never know. I mean, perhaps they do have to stay there for a long time. And the gates are the first thing that you'd want to fix. But more than that, really what's going on here is that these tasks have symbolic and therapeutic value. She's keeping her people busy when they might become hopeless. Think about feeling stressed out about a bigger problem and finding relief in like the zen of like just cleaning your mirror or something. Like, I mean, like a really big stressful problem where you're pacing your house and sometimes like, I'm just going to like do the dishes, right? So this is what she's doing. She's keeping her people busy so that they don't stress out about the bigger problem. And even more so, there's symbolic value of planting things and repairing the gates, because this also sends the message that she's not just trying to survive, but also planning for the future. Like we're envisioning a time when these plants will grow and we can harvest them. And of course, they say dragons don't plant trees, but Dany does plant trees in Meereen, and she plants plants right here in Vaes Talora. So I just think that's cool. What do you think, Gretchen?
I think it's really interesting also that by like the planting and the gates, she's also re-envisioning a different way of life for the Dothraki, because the Dothraki don't live in walled cities and plant things. The Dothraki live a nomadic kind of life, pillaging. And so she's starting a Khalasar with all the trappings of power of being a Khal, which I think is interesting that it never crosses her mind that like they should be different for her because she's a woman. She's just like, right, I'm a Khal now. Like I will do all the things a Khal does, even though I'm a woman. So she's doing that, but she's also showing them that her way of having a Khalasar is going to be different because she wants to give them a peaceful, settled life rather than the like either a life on the run, which they have right now, or like pillaging and raiding the way the Dothraki have. And I didn't even think of that till now, until you said we were talking. I was like, oh, that's really interesting that she's giving them a future that looks different from even what their experience has been.
That's interesting. It hadn't occurred to me at all, but you're totally right. And it goes along with her willingness to change Dothraki culture when she was like, no, we're not going to rape all the women. I'm claiming these one as mine and I'm keeping them safe. And if you want to have sex with them, then you'll marry them and have children and treat them with respect. And so she again is, you know, she's being resourceful. That's really what it is. It's like they don't have much. And this continues when they get to Qarth. Like Dany is looking for an army and a fleet. Like she's starting from zero. If this is like Sim City, Westeros or whatever, she's got like 100 people and some horses, and she needs to get to army and fleet. So she's got a long way to go. And she's in Qarth looking for whatever kind of help she can. She's going to the different powers that be in Qarth, even the warlocks, to try to find something. So she's working with what she got. And actually, Ball, here's a free one for your Rey-Dany comparison. So Rey is a scavenger, right? And her role is kind of to collect the things that are good and let the other things go and make something new out of it. Well, Dany is doing a little bit of the same thing. Like she is in the sense that she's thinking flexibly and working with whatever she can find and making use of it. She's even working with people who aren't perfect. Like even after she realizes Jorah has a creepy crush on her, she still continues to listen to his advice because it's useful. He's one of the only, nobody else has his perspective in her crew. And so, you know, when she gets to Qarth, these are very imperfect allies that she's considering, but she does what, you know, and again, Slaver's Bay with the Unsullied. She's just trying to work with whatever she can. So I like the flexible thinking. Flexible thinking is really important, especially when you've got this idea that you should take Westeros with dragons, but it's kind of a trap and you're going to need to see through it at the end. It's good that you have flexible thinking and perceptiveness. So, and that's kind of kind of the whole point of like talking about all the smart, like Dany's wise, Dany's perceptive. Like this isn't just about whether or not Dany, her relationship to violence and dragons, because the way that I see this framed is that the true purpose of the dragons is to fight the others. And to the extent that she wants to be the mother of Westeros and protect the people of Westeros, it ultimately is going to mean fighting the others. And so what she thinks right now is that she's got to save the people of Westeros by sitting the Iron Throne. And so that essentially is a little bit of a trap or a false prize, which is what the Iron Throne represents anyways. And in order to see through that, we need somebody who is perceptive, who is cautious, who stops and reconsiders all that stuff. So that's kind of what we're trying to track here with her personality.
Right. Totally agree with that.
Now,
Joanna Espino in the chat said, it's difficult to see a world that has never been, which I think is a Dany quote from the show, but that kind of fits with what we're talking about here, because what Dany is doing is giving her people a vision of what life could be like, even in a very small measure at this point. She's envisioning a future for them that they have never experienced and never lived before, and making it participatory. Like, she's not just showing them, she's like having them engage with like, this is how you do it. This is how you live this life. And whether or not she's thinking on those terms, it's what she's doing for them, is like giving them a way to participate in their own transformation, I guess, and the transformation of their own culture and way of thinking. She's giving them jobs that will eventually, you know, over time would eventually shape the way they think of like, oh, right, yeah, we plant things, we build gates, we don't, you know, rape and pillage, and we don't do that anymore. So I just think that's awesome. So good comment, Joanna.
Right on. Thank you, Joanna. And as we go along, we're going to see there's a lot more. Dany continues to reflect on what it means to retake Westeros. How will the Dothraki act? How will the dragons act? And all that stuff. So we are coming to that. Now, one thing that really jumped out to me, Gretchen, when I checked out the scene where Dany arrives at the gates of Qarth, is that I watched the TV show version of this to try to like grab some.
Don't you mean Qarth?
Qarth. To try to. So I'm looking for screenshots and I'm watching this scene, and Dany, they sort of deny her, if you remember in the TV show, and Dany has to like make threats. She specifically threatens to burn their city down, and it's pretty much the first time she goes like 10 decibels. I will burn you down. I am the dragon. Blah, blah, blah. Now in the books, it's totally different.
I feel like I need to like.
She's just invited right in. She doesn't make any threats, and she actually is sort of thoughtful and reflective instead. So check out this quote from the books where she is entering the city of Qarth.
The Qartheen lined the street from delicate balconies that looked too frail to support their weight. They were tall, pale folk in linen and samite and tiger fur, everyone a lord or lady to her eyes. The women wore gowns that left one breast bare, while the men favored beaded silk skirts. Dany felt shabby and barbaric as she rode past them in her lion-skin robe, with black drogon on one shoulder. Her Dothraki called the Qartheen milkmen for their paleness, and Khal Drogo had dreamed of the day when he might sack the great cities of the east. She glanced at her blood riders, their dark almond-shaped eyes giving no hint of their thoughts. Is it only the plunder they see? She wondered. How savage we must seem to these Qartheen.
So I'm a fan of Dany's flexibility of thinking here, because not only is she resisting being overwhelmed by the splendor of Qarth, she's also seeing the Dothraki in a new light and shifting her perspective of the world as she sees new information. She loves her Dothraki family, but she is not blind to their cultural flaws, namely love of rape and plunder, as we discussed. And being aware of how you come across to people is really not something that we should take for granted. It's not something you could say about everybody. Dany is constantly self-reflective and self-aware, and this is really just one example of many. So Xaro and Pyatt are obviously untrustworthy. Dany knows this. And yet there is, like I was saying, there's no shining paragon of honor and truth waiting around to give Dany an army. So she's got to do her best to ascertain if there's some way that she can find resources here in Qarth. She's neither blind nor over-trusting nor overly suspicious to the point of trusting no one. That's highlighted here as, I think I mangled that sentence. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that she's neither blind and over-trusting nor overly suspicious to the point of trusting no one. So she's trying to strike that balance. And that's highlighted here as Jorah points out the obvious concerning Pyatt, Pri, and Xaro and Daxos. It's the Exile Knight.
Yep. Sorry, my microphone was muted because I was typing and my keyboard was loud. The Exile Knight rode at her right hand, as ever. For their entrance into Qarth, he had put away his Dothraki garb and donned again the plate and mail and wool of the Seven Kingdoms, half a world away. You would do well to avoid both those men, your grace. Those men will help me to my crown, she said. Xaro has vast wealth, and Pyatt Pri pretends to power, the knight said brusquely. On his dark green surcoat, the bear of House Mormont stood on its hind legs, black and fierce. Jorah looked no less ferocious as he scowled at the crowd that filled the bazaar. I would not linger here long, my queen. I mislike the very smell of this place. Dany smiled. Perhaps it's the camels you're smelling. The Qartheen themselves seem sweet enough to my nose. Sweet smells are sometimes used to cover foul ones.
So Dany sees both sides of the matter, and thus she reacts to Jorah's suspicion by sort of doing a little bit of devil's advocate and reminding him that, hey, we need allies, and we've got to explore all of the possibilities. She actually does do a good job of heeding Jorah's advice when it is sensible, even if she is currently angry with him, as we'll see in A Storm of Swords. And Jorah's advice about perfumes covering foul odors is pretty good. And even though Dany seems to shrug it off, she actually doesn't. In fact, she actually sets her blood riders to guarding the wing of Xaro's mansion as though they were in enemy territory right after this conversation with Jorah. So she's seeing both sides of the coin. And in her third chapter, there's a similar moment as she deals with various factions of power in Qarth. She's thinking of Jorah. He distrusts everyone, and perhaps for good reason. So even though she poo-poos his suspicions and at times paternalistic nature, she still considers what she's saying and looks for wisdom. So in other words, she's taking everything with a grain of salt while still being open-minded to opportunity, which seems like a pretty good balance to strike. Myself, I'd probably be too suspicious to talk to any of these people in Qarth because, these are shifty folks. In any case, Dany's wisdom and caution extends beyond simply setting a watch. This is really impressive right here, this passage. Go ahead and take this one.
We have only seen the parts of Qarth that Pyat Pri wished us to see, she went on. Racharo, go forth and look on the rest, and tell me what you find. Take good men with you, and women, to go places where men are forbidden. As you say, I do, blood of my blood, said Racharo. Sir Jorah, find the docks and see what manner of ships lie at anchor. It has been half a year since I last heard tidings from the Seven Kingdoms. Perhaps the gods will have blown some good captain here from Westeros with a ship to carry us home. The knight frowned. That would be no kindness. The usurper will kill you, sure as sunrise. Mormont hooked his thumbs through his sword belt. My place is here at your side. Jogo can guard me as well. You have more languages than my blood riders, and the Dothraki mistrust the sea and those who sail her. Only you can serve me in this. Go among the ships and speak to the crews. Learn where they are from, and where they are bound, and what manner of men command them. Reluctantly, the exile nodded. As you say, my queen.
So not only is this wise, it shows that Dany doesn't think like a pampered member of royalty. I mean, this isn't something that Viserys would have done. He wouldn't even think to do this because Viserys never empathizes with people that he sees as below him, which is pretty much everyone. And he never tries to see the world from other people's perspective. Dany and Viserys both have the sort of real-world experience that should bring societal wisdom, such as we're speaking of, because Viserys didn't grow up pampered, obviously, but he didn't, like I said, identify with people that he saw as below him. And so we can see that Viserys is very foolish, whereas Dany is wise and perceptive. She knows that the Qarthian are putting on a show for them and that the lower levels of society may not be so, they might not glimmer so brightly as the rich parts that they're being shown right now. And so she's like, hey, we got to go find out what the other people are saying. What's the word on the street? What's the ugly side? What's the truth here? So she's also getting the knack, and I like this in particular, she's getting the knack of skillfully standing up to experienced tough guys like Jorah without being imperious or haughty. Imagine that. She uses skill and tact instead.
Right.
I know I used to be an assistant manager at Guitar Center. And let me tell you, it's hard to tell people what to do and not come across like a jerk. It really is to give orders and not seem like you're giving orders, like you're just asking a favor, but it's a favor that, has to be done. And Dany is already getting the knack of this. So.
Yep. I also thought it was interesting that Dany has exhibited this tendency to gravitate towards the outsiders of society since A Game of Thrones, because she, gets advice from her handmaids. And she gets information from her handmaid. She loves to go to the market and be around the common people. She doesn't do what Viserys does, which is just hang out with Westerosi or just hang out in her tent and act imperious and she's better than everybody. She's trying to make friends in common cause with the people that I think in her mind she perceives of as being similar to her, which is, tellingly enough, it's her handmaids who are slaves, because those are the people she identifies with. So it makes sense that she understands, right, there's a whole other level of society that we don't always see, because she saw that in the Dothraki culture. Like there was the women's culture that they existed in a kind of society of their own that like most people might not see on the surface. So she, you know, it really is impressive that at such a young age she was able to recognize that while she's already, you know, also suffering her own traumas and difficult experiences, is able to recognize this and then utilize it, you know, everywhere she goes. So,
and it's just endlessly impressive to me. I mean, you know, we are trying to answer the questions of like, where is her plot going? But it's also just worth taking time to celebrate this character. I mean, this is always, like I said, always been my favorite character a lot. And it's not like last time I talked about the idea of, you know, lost childhood and empathy and all the stuff. But I really like her flexible thinking and the way that she is reflective. She's one of the most reflective characters in the books. And I don't think that's an accident. I think George is doing a very careful job of creating this character and having us get to know her so that we will understand the decisions that she makes at the end, instead of going, anyways.
Wait, what? You mean an author wants us to like make sense of a character so that their actions like make sense with things, like that they're consistent? Like what madness? What madness is
madness?
This?
I know. So let's do, all right. So we're still on the idea of leadership, wisdom, discernment, that kind of stuff. We're in the third chapter now. She's navigating the various powers that be in Qarth and looking for aid in her quest to retake Westeros, like I was saying. And she's demonstrating a lot of wisdom and perceptiveness while she's doing that. And this chapter begins with her already having tried and failed with most of these various factions, which are neatly summed up in this paragraph.
The merchant princes, grown vastly rich off of the trade between the seas, were divided into 3 jealous factions: the ancient Guild of Spicers, the Tourmaline Brotherhood, and the 13, to which Zarro belonged. Each vied with the others for dominance, and all 3 contended endlessly with the Pureborn, and brooding over all were the warlocks, with their blue lips and dread powers, seldom seen but much feared.
And Guilty Undertaker does have a good point that Tyrion walks through the market and looks at the people with contempt, whereas Dany walks through the market and feels like she belongs. So that is another good contrast. And the more you contrast Dany with other characters, the more it stands out. Like I shared something on Twitter about Arya sort of having this fantasy about like the crows pecking off Joffrey's face and stuff. I wish I was a crow so I could peck his face off and his fat lips and all this stuff. And it's like, whoa there. Like, okay, I mean, you know, granted, yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, Joffrey's bad and stuff. But, you know, George is he's showing us what it looks like when we have a young person, specifically a young girl, that's sort of having an arc that's shaping up for her to do mass murder. Like, this is what it looks like. You know, ideations of like elaborate revenge fantasies. And I mean, Dany doesn't do that, you know, in contrast. So anyways, like I said, Tourmaline Brotherhood, Guild of Spicers, the 13, the Pureborn, the Warlocks, those are the 5 powers. The Pureborn command the largest fleet. So that's the one Dany wants the most. But despite performing the customary rituals and offering all the customary bribes, they are unwilling to help. Dany is quick to realize the truth of the matter, thinking that they never saw me for a queen, she thought bitterly. I was only an afternoon's amusement, a horse girl with a curious pet. And a little bit later, she thinks, they listened, but they did not hear or care. They are milkmen indeed. They never meant to help me. They came because they were curious. They came because they were bored, and the dragon on my shoulder interested them more than I did. So figuring out what's going on here pretty quick, right? She suffers not fools and holds not illusions. And again, contrast her to Viserys, who maintained these foolhardy ideas that people were sewing dragon banners and that he was going to lead a Khalasar. None of it was realistic. Dany's the opposite. She's very realistic and grasps, you know, these little failures right when they happen and doesn't try to fool herself about it. So another good example of this comes from an exchange with Zarro a couple of pages later.
Can I just throw in that like this is a great example of why it makes perfect sense for Dany to be the slayer of lies and to slay the lie of the Mummer's dragon, because we see early on, even before she gets that prophecy, that she is someone who can see through a lot of the veneer of things and kind of get to the truth and the heart underneath without being taken in by flashy appearances or, you know, grand cheering crowds who love, you know, Aegon from across the sea. Like, she would be able, of anyone, She would be one of the best poised to be able to see through all of that. I think Sansa would be another because she's also someone who sees kind of below the surface in that way. But Dany especially, we see early on that she's very well foreshadowed to be someone who wouldn't be taken in.
You're right. Yeah. And we are, if we have time, we're going to talk about the undying prophecy at the end. And there's a lot of little pieces like that that tie back into other themes of her thing. And you're right. The Slayer of Lies is well set up. It's not just the line in the prophecy. So cool. Good point. And yes. So go ahead and this is a quote about Rhaegal, the perceptive dragon, who knows his wine.
I was about to start singing, but I won't. As Dany lifted her goblet to drink, Rhaegal sniffed at the wine and drew his head back, hissing. Your dragon has a good nose. Xaro wiped his lips. The wine is ordinary. It is said that across the Jade Sea they make a golden vintage so fine that one sip makes all other wine taste like vinegar. Let us take my pleasure barge and go in search of it, you and I. The Arbor makes the best wine in the world, Dany declared. Lord Redwine had fought for her father against the usurper, she remembered, one of the few to remain true to the last. Will he fight for me as well? There was no way to be certain after so many years. Come with me to the Arbor, Xaro, and you'll have the finest vintages you ever tasted, but we'll need to go in a warship, not a pleasure barge. I have no warships. War is bad for trade. Many times I have told you, Xaro Zoandaxos is a man of peace. Xaro Zoandaxos is a man of gold, she thought, and gold will buy me all the ships and swords I need. I have not asked you to take up a sword, only to lend me your ships. He smiled modestly. Of trading ships, I have a few, that is so. Who can say how many? One may be sinking even now in some stormy corner of the summer sea. On the morrow, another will fall afoul of corsairs. The next day, one of my captains may look at the wealth in his hold and think, all this should belong to me. Such are the perils of trade. Why, the longer we talk, the fewer ships I am likely to have. I grow poorer by the instant. Give me ships, and I will make you rich again. Marry me, bright light, and sail the ship of my heart. I cannot sleep at night for thinking of your beauty. Dany smiled. Xaro's flowery protestations of passion amused her, but his manner was at odds with his words. While Ser Jorah had scarcely been able to keep his eyes from her bare breast when he'd helped her into the palanquin, Xaro hardly deigned to notice it, even in these close confines. And she had seen the beautiful boys who surrounded the merchant prince, flitting through his palace walls in wisps of silk. You speak sweetly, Xaro, but under your words I hear another no.
Let's all give a hand for Ball the Bard, who is absolutely capturing the essence of both Xaro Zoandaxos and Ser Jorah. Very well done. Loving this. So yeah, Dany is perceptive. I almost used an extinct term that we don't use that's a joke off the word radar. However, Dany's radar is accurate. She sees what's going on here. She knows that important thing is that she knows Xaro doesn't want to marry her for like straightforward interests. He has some ulterior motive, which they eventually sniff out. They realize there's a Qarthine wedding custom that if she marries her, he can ask her for anything on the first night, and she would have to give him one of her dragons, basically. So she's in.
I like this first night better.
What's that?
I like this first night better.
It is better. It's better. Like one gift. Yeah, definitely a better custom. But for Dany, of course, she can't be suckered out of one of her dragons. And so Xaro is the one who's helping her the most, but still he's not trustworthy. So Dany's in the awkward position of basically living off of his hospitality, but also still trying to feel out his intentions, which she is doing. So, yep. All right. So then along the lines of Dany knowing to seek out the word on the street in Qarth and generally being conscious of all levels of society, we have the scene at the market where she immediately recognizes the cut purse racket going on.
The fire mage had conjured a ladder in the air, a crackling orange ladder of swirling flame that rose unsupported from the floor of the bazaar, reaching toward the high latticed roof. Most of the spectators, she noticed, were not of the city. She saw sailors off trading ships, merchants come by caravan, dusty men out of the red waste, wandering soldiers, craftsmen, slavers, Jogo slid one hand about her waist and leaned close. The milkmen shun him. Khaleesi, do you see the girl in the felt hat? There, behind the fat priest. She is a cut purse, finished Dany. She was no pampered lady blind to such things. She had seen cut purses aplenty in the streets of the free cities. During the years she'd spent with her brother, running from the usurpers' hired knives. The mage was gesturing, urging the flames higher and higher with broad sweeps of his arms. As the watchers craned their necks upward, the cut purses squirmed through the press, small blades hidden in their palms. They relieved the prospectus of their coin with one hand, while pointing upward with the other.
So there you go. Again, Dany kind of knows what's up. She sees the different levels of society going on. And I like how this is woven in with, obviously, the other thing that's going on here is the fire mage climbing the ladder. It's, it's a magical distraction. And then Quaithe pops up with her cryptic advice. So there's a lot of magical stuff going on. But again, we see these character building moments where it's not just a scene in the market. Like Dany, George takes a minute to show us that Dany's perceptive and knows what is going on. So very cool. All right. Let's see. There was a super chat a bit ago that I missed that you grabbed for me. Thank you. And it was from Chris B, who asks, I'm interested in the ultimate occult Gnostic point that George is trying to make. John is Jesus, but through history, we keep killing, forgetting our mother goddess, Dany. So that's a huge question. I would say that Dany definitely has a lot of mother goddess ideas around Dany for sure. I'm trying to figure out like how to give a quick answer to this question. I don't know if there's a message. George is drawing from so many different myths to build characters, but none of them are like quite one-to-one. So in the sense that every character is the hero of their own story, so many characters we have found doing the Azor Ahai symbolism routine, even Arya, Davos, all kinds of people who are clearly not Azor Ahai reborn like Dany or Jon is. So I think if there's a message, it might be like everyone has that heroic moment. Azor Hype talks about, Kyle, he talks about an Azor Ahai moment, kind of like that moment of heroism that is in so many different arcs, and it's often paralleled to the Azor Ahai myth or the Nissa Nissa myth or anything like that. So I think that the message probably it'll be there once it's done. Like I don't think we're going to get a Jon killing Dany because Dany's the evil tyrant ending, of course. So we'll have to see what George does do with those two characters, with the reveal of RLJ, how it's used, and how those two come together to be able to see what kind of commentary he's giving. But if you think about the mother goddess often reflects like suppressed emotions, suppression of nature, and stuff like that. And so Dany is definitely coming around and almost like the vengeance of the oppressed. I mean, that's the whole point of her, like freeing slaves, starting off as a slave, always identifying with the downtrodden, like her draconic nature being associated with protection and vengeance for her children fits in with that very well. So I think that we'll have to see what level of judgment and punishment that Dany might be bringing to the evil people of Westeros, even before she fights the others. Do you have some comments you'd like to add? I'm sure you do.
I would say that if Martin is trying to do something, I could see potentially the idea that like being a hero is multifaceted. Like there's more than one way to be a hero, because Jon and Dany are heroic in different ways. Because they have different symbolism, different mythologies associated with them. And I would say that there may be something to the idea of Martin showing that, not that there is this kind of like specifically gendered way to be a hero, but that like it is very common to have the hero, especially in a lot of medieval-esque fantasy, is typically male. So the fact that he's paralleling Jon and Dany as both heroes, I think says something about the fact that he wants us to see that, we could, being a hero is more than just about being like the primary male character in the story, the way that we're used to expecting that. I think it is interesting that he's got like a male and female protagonist that have very similar arcs and closely parallel each other, and we're supposed to compare them to each other as this kind of, you've talked before about the like the way that the yin and the yang function together, and like ice and fire, this kind of duality, and that Martin might be drawing on the idea that like there is an important, you know, mother goddess warrior type energy that we have been neglecting within the, I would say maybe even the Western canon of storytelling, because we've been so focused on like the archetypal male hero that we have kind of forgotten that like there is another, you know, energy in the universe that may be embodied as the divine feminine. And Dany's got aspects of that because he draws on so many different goddesses when he, you know, talks about Dany, and a lot of them have both, you know, the mothering energy and the destructive energy. You've talked about Kali before, that like that energy is involved as well. Dany's got both like destruction and birth and creation, life and death kind of going together. So I feel like I'm kind of rambling.
Right in the name. I remember when I figured, oh, Kali.
She's Kali.
Oh, Colleen. Khaleesi. Ah.
I love it when you have that moment where you're like, duh, why did I not see the thing staring me in the face? Like, those are great.
It is right there. Yeah, I still have a really this nice little hunk of Kali research that I never got into an episode. I need to circle back around and get that. Thanks for reminding me, universe.
It's pretty cool. It goes along with what Salty Caps fan and a couple of other people and I were talking about last week of like fire and blood being hearth and home, as well as like death and destruction. That seems to kind of go along with the idea of Kali, like as well. You have that duality built in of like destructive power, but also hearth, home, safety, life-giving power. Like both of those things kind of combined in one, and Dany represents all of that. So I think you could come back to Kali.
And to follow up, another comment here in the chat talking about heroism and self-sacrifice. George does, like, that's the whole point of the Azor Ahai myth, is that it's a false heroic ideal that the hero is Azor Ahai, the guy who has to commit blood sacrifice to create a weapon. If you take the Azor Ahai myth straight forward, like the hero is actually Nissa, right? She's the one who sacrifices to create the weapon. But I think that primarily the myth is presented so that we're given this idea that, like, yeah, sometimes the heroes just have to do really, really bad stuff. And of course, Davos says, oh, I couldn't do that. So I think that we're going to see some important inversions of that, meaning that the real heroic ideal is the Nissa side of it, the self-sacrifice. And I wouldn't be surprised if George flips it around and it's Jon sacrificing something in a Nissa-like way. Of course, he's a magical being, so I'm not saying like Dany's got to stab him with a sword, but I'm just looking. George likes to flip the roles around a lot. Like even in the alchemical wedding, Drogo and Dany are both doing Nissa and Azor Ahai things. It's flipping around on both sides. So that's getting off the beaten path, but I hope that was worth your money, Chris B, if you will. So let's go back to, there we go, the script. So I've got a little chunk, a very small collection of a few different moments of kindness and empathy. Like I said, it's a bigger theme in the first book, but there are a few cool moments that I wanted to talk about. The first one is in her first chapter when they're in the Red Waste. It brings us the very sad death of Dorea, who, of course, gave us the Qarthian tale of the second moon. May she rest in peace.
Dorea took a fever and grew worse with every league they crossed. Her lips and hands broke with blood blisters. Her hair came out in clumps, and one even fall she lacked the strength to mount her horse. Drogo said they must leave her or bind her to the saddle, but Dany remembered a night on the Dothraki Sea when the Lyseni girl had taught her secret so that Drogo might love her more. She gave Dorea water from her own skin, cooled her brow with a damp cloth, and held her hand until she died, shivering. Only then would she permit the Khalasar to press on.
So Dany has respect for the dead and for every member of her group. She often tends to her people herself. And there's a nice little bit about Dany tending to Jorah's wound just a little bit later.
One woman was stung by a red scorpion, but hers was the only death. The horses began to put on some flesh. Dany tended Ser Jorah's wound herself, and it began to heal. Maybe she should have tended Drogo's wound herself.
Yeah, well.
Also, it makes me think of Lord of the Rings because the hands of a king are the hands of a healer, so...
Oh, hey.
Good Queen Dany.
She really does do a lot of hands-on stuff. And again, I have to think this is George trying to show us something. Like, she's not above the fray. You know, she walks right out into the crowds of disease, you know, a disease, not disease. That's not really what I want to say, disease-ridden. But the refugee camps where the pale mare is rampant. You know, she walks out there to give comfort to her people. So she's just never afraid of getting her hands dirty or helping directly. And I think that's cool. So are you ready to read the sad story of, actually, it's not, we're not going to read the whole Linus story. This is basically Dany reacting to Jorah after the Linus story. But you remember Jorah fell in love with young, beautiful Linus Hightower when he won a tournament. And another young girl, Jorah was twice her age. You know, that's creepy Jorah for you. And essentially he had a very short marriage to this woman. She was a Southern woman and he lived in Bear Island, and they went back to Bear Island, and there wasn't enough feasts and happiness and revelry for her. She didn't like it. And so Jorah began doing bad things to come up with money, and they ended up running away from home. And that's how Jorah left his home, and they went over to Essos, and it's a whole long, sad story. Point is, there's two takeaways, is that Jorah, Linus looks like Dany, and Jorah associates, sort of transfers his long lost crush for his lost love onto Dany. And Dany figures this out, but still has sympathy for him. So go ahead and read this passage.
She gave him leave to go, but as he was lifting the flap of her tent, she could not stop herself calling after him with one last question. What did she look like, your lady Linus? Sir Jorah smiled sadly. Why, she looked a bit like you, Daenerys. He bowed low. Sleep well, my queen. Dany shivered and pulled the lion skin tight about her. She looked like me. It explained much that she had not truly understood. He wants me, she realized. He loves me as he loved her, not as a knight loves his queen, but as a man loves a woman. She tried to imagine herself in Sir Jorah's arms, kissing him, pleasuring him, letting him enter her. It was no good. When she closed her eyes, his face kept changing into Drogo's. She had heard the longing in Sir Jorah's voice when he spoke of his Bear Island. He can never have me, but one day I can give him back his home and honor. That much I can do for him.
Oh, hey.
Is break time over? Okay, so
You're smoking, dragon. Gee.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. It's that's just I got a fog machine. It's stage effect.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't
Hey, it's legal. It's totally legal where you are. It's fine. Don't worry about
it. All right. Where were we? Oh yes. Jorah, creepy Jorah. So point of this is that, again, Dany's able to compartmentalize. She's perceptive and realizes what's going on. Oh, okay, I get it. He has a crush on me because I look like his lost love. Da-da-da-da-da. Kind of creepy. But again, Jorah is a valuable source of advice, a valuable ally. And so she has to navigate the situation delicately. And I like the way that she kind of figures out basically like what he really wants. He doesn't really want a new honey, a new main squeeze. It's actually not what Jorah wants. What Jorah really wants. Oh, am I saying awkward things while you're on the internet, Paul the Bard, and making you laugh?
I have never thought of Dany as like a honey or a main squeeze. They're just like weird words to associate with Dany or Jorah for that matter. Like, ugh.
That was the idea. In any case, she figures out that what he really wants is basically his home and his honor. And so she says, you know, he can never have me, but one day I can give him back his home and honor. That much I can do for him. So I just like that. She's empathetic, you know, and she's able to just do multiple things at one time. Like, she's not totally freaked out by the crush thing. That's all she can think about. So just like that. Spinning multiple plates, empathetic and perceptive.
So I don't know how to change names. Just said the bear wants honey. So you didn't even realize what you were doing, and you made a really good joke.
Also, in my head, a bear all covered with hair.
I mean, he is a hairy bear.
That song is about cunnilingus, by the way, if you can figure that out.
Yeah. I started singing in my head, what a knight wants, what a knight needs, whatever makes him happy. Like, I don't know.
Is that Christina 2 streams in a row? Yes, I love Christina. Ray John.
Yep.
Okay, so yes, this is more empathy coming with Viserys post-mortem. In her third chapter, she's contemplating her failures to gain assistance in Qarth, and she's pondering the nature of being a beggar king, just like Viserys. And she finds some empathy for him. The paragraph begins with her thinking about how she has sold off all the rich gifts offered to her in Qarth to bribe the pureborn.
The crown was the only offering she'd kept. The rest she sold to gather the wealth she had wasted on the pureborn. Zara would have sold the crown too. The 13 would see that she had a much finer one, he swore, but Dany forbade it. Viserys sold my mother's crown, and men called him a beggar. I shall keep this one, so men will call me a queen. And so she did, though the weight of it made her neck ache. Yet even crowned I am a beggar still, Dany thought. I have become the most splendid beggar in the world, but all the same. She hated it, as her brother must have. All those years of running from one city to another. Oh, pardon me. All those years of running from city to city, one step ahead of the usurper's knives, pleading for help from archons and princes and magisters, buying our food with flattery. He must have known how they mocked him. Small wonder he turned so angry and bitter. In the end, it had driven him mad. It will do the same to me if I let it. Part of her would have liked nothing more than to lead her people back to Vaes Taloro and make the dead city bloom. No, that is defeat. I have something Viserys had. I have the dragons. The dragons are all the difference.
So this is pretty important self-reflection here. She's thinking about the symbols of power versus actual power. You know, the crown is a symbol, and she's recognizing that that's important, but obviously she needs real power too. So she's thinking about power on multiple levels. In addition to this insightful empathy for Viserys, Dany's also wise to consider the toll that various choices will have on her own psyche. So this is like some pretty good self-awareness here. Again and again, we see Dany demonstrate empathy in tandem with wisdom. And again, we see her determination tempered by realism. And I just love those things. So, all right. So the fifth chapter, the last little small kindness moment, this is the scene where Sir Barristan and Strong Belwas save Dany from the sorrowful man and the manticore that's in the little jeweled box. So as Dany and Jorah are watching Belwas and Barristan, who's disguised as Arstan Whitebeard, of course, in the reflection of the large brass plate. If you remember, they're doing this thing where they're haggling with the brass vendor and holding up the plate and looking in the reflection to see the people behind them. So Dany's haggling with the brass merchant, and she's bargaining down the value of the plate in order to buy time and draw the thing out. And she's actually getting pretty mean. She says, "It might serve to carry night soil, and if you threw it away, I might pick it up, so long as I did not need to stoop." So it's pretty creative. But so after the manticore is killed and the threat passes, Dany has a nice little moment with the terrified brass merchant, who she's been insulting for like 5 minutes.
They were defending me. Dany snapped her hand to shake the sting from her fingers. It was the other one, the Qartheen. When she looked around, he was gone. He was a sorrowful man. There was a manticore in that jewel box he gave me. This man knocked it out of my hand. The brass merchant was still rolling on the ground. She went to him and helped him to his feet. Were you stung? No, good lady, he said, shaking, or else I would be dead. But it touched me. Aye! When it fell from the box, it landed on my arm. He had soiled himself, she saw, and no wonder. She gave him a silver for his trouble and sent him on his way before she turned back to the old man with the white beard. Who is it that I owe my life to?
So she's just, basic decency, thoughtful empathy. She doesn't act like royalty who doesn't need to give a crap about the little commoners pooping their pants around her as they almost die, on her behalf. No, she's like, thank you. You saved my life and you suffered on my behalf. So here's a coin, and just like it. Very cool. So, all right. So we're going to come back to the House of the Undying Vision. So let's go ahead all the way back to the top of the document. Gretchen.
Yes.
Now we're going to get to kind of the most important part of this book for her, I think.
Yeah. Well, Guilty Undertaker made the joke that Arstan Whitebeard will never not make me chuckle, and I totally agree. Like, poor Barry. I mean, I love Barristan. He's like, I'm not Barristan. I'm Arstan Whitebeard.
Yeah. I'm a squire. I'm 70, but I'm a squire.
He's just like,
Oh, and also let me tell you more about the third generation Targaryen dynasty. Like,
he's so bad at hiding. He is so bad. He's like the person who like buys the like glasses with the fake big nose and the mustache and is like, look at me, I'm a spy.
Like standing behind the plant, you know, like
you can't see me. Like he's just bless him. Bless
totally call that.
Selmy.
You nailed that, dude. That's I want that fan art now. I want Barristan Selmy with like the nose.
Someone who has artistic skills, which I do not have, please draw Barristan Selmy wearing like the glasses with the big nose and fake mustache and being like,
I think this is a bad Photoshop thing. Actually, I'll literally take a shot of Barristan.
Yes.
I'll do a bad photo. Okay. I have spoken. So anyways, Magical Destiny. Here we go. Here's the quote with the comet. And this is obviously, not obviously, but actually the first opening lines of Dany's first chapter in A Clash of Kings.
The Dothraki named the comet Shirak Kira, the bleeding star. The old men muttered that it omened ill, but Daenerys Targaryen had seen it first on the night she had burned Khal Drogo, the night her dragons had awakened. It is the herald of my coming, she told herself as she gazed up into the night sky with wonder in her heart. The gods have sent it to me to show me the way. Yet when she put the thought into words, her handmaid Dorea quailed. That way lies the Red Lands, Khaleesi, a grim place and terrible, the writers say. The way the comet points is the way we must go, Dany insisted, though in truth, it was the only way open to her.
So discussion of how they can't go back into the Dothraki Sea or towards Slaver's Bay ensues, because the problem is the Khalasars will take them captive. They go towards the Lazarene. They have got no reason to love them. Jorah explains that even Drogo's Blood Riders and Khos treated Dany well before, who treated Dany well before would now take her captive.
You will not live long should you meet Calpono, nor Caljacco, nor any of the others. You must not go where they do not. Dany had named him the first of her Queen's Guard, and when Mormont's gruff counsel and the omens agreed, her course was clear. We will follow the comet, Dany told her Khalasar. Once it was said, no word was raised against it. They had been Drogo's people, but they were hers now. The unburnt, they called her, and mother of dragons. Her word was their law.
So, like I alluded to earlier, she's not just following the comet into the wasteland for the heck of it. It actually is her only way to go. So it's not really a potential sign of madness, but more a case of like latching on to the only bit of hope that she has, and also trying to inspire people, because we follow the comet is like a little more inspiring than, well, this is our only choice. So there you go. Now, to the extent that Dany is clinging to the belief that the comet does have magical significance, one can understand. I mean, it did appear in spectacular fashion when she performed an actual miracle. So, there is that. Now, there's 3 passages in A Clash of Kings, Dany 1, that highlight what Dany's dragons mean to her in regards to magical destiny, which, again, that's the over topic here that we're talking about, Dany's sense of her own magical destiny. This one begins with Jorah speaking.
Your dragon eggs were more precious than rubies. A living dragon is beyond price. In all the world there are only 3. Every man who sees them will want them, my queen. They are mine, she said fiercely. They had been born from her faith and her need, given life by the deaths of her husband and unborn son, and the Magi Miri Mazdur. Dany had walked into the flames as they came forth, and they had drunk milk from her swollen breasts. No man will take them from me while I live.
So then a minute later, the narrative discusses Dany's concern for her dragons and all the losses that she's suffered on the way to birthing them. And that's kind of the thing I want to highlight here.
Dany hungered and thirsted with the rest of them. The milk in her breasts dried up, her nipples cracked and bled, and the flesh fell away from her day by day until she was lean and hard as a stick. Yet it was her dragons she feared for. Her father had been slain before she was born, and her splendid brother Rhaegar as well. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, while the storm screamed outside. Gentle Sir Willem Darry, who must have loved her after a fashion, had been taken by a wasting sickness when she was very young. Her brother Viserys, Khal Drogo, who was her sun and stars, even her unborn son, the gods had claimed them all. They will not have my dragons, Dany vowed. They will not.
So definitely another taste of the fearsome mother goddess protecting her children vibe. That aspect of Dany's character. And then a bit later, there's a similar quote to the one we just read, which again expands on the price that she paid to birth her dragons, which basically communicates kind of what they mean to her.
The Dothraki looked at the hatchlings uneasily. The largest of her 3 was shiny black, his scales slashed with streaks of vivid scarlet to match his wings and horns. Khaleesi, Aggo murmured. There sits Balerion, come again. It may be as you say, blood of my blood, Dany replied gravely, but he shall have a new name for his new life. I would name them all for those the gods have taken. The green one shall be Rhaegal, for my valiant brother who died on the green banks of the Trident. The cream and gold I call Viserion. Viserys was cruel and weak and frightened, yet he was my still. His dragon will do what he could not. And the black beast? Asked Sir Jorah Mormont. The black, she said, is Drogon.
So, in other words, the dragons are basically all she has to show for all her tragedies and all her losses, which is a lot. She's almost trying to draw a line in the sand with the gods or with fate itself, saying, look, you've taken everything I hold dear. You can't have my dragons. So her magical destiny is not simply fueled by the notion of destiny, nor by the individual components of magic and destiny. It's everything. It's basically, this is what emerged from the fire after everything else was burnt away. That's the way to say it. So try to put yourself in her shoes. Imagine all these losses, your brother, Drogo, your family, everything. You're by your own in the Dothraki Sea. You've just lost your child too. And emerging on the other side, you wake dragons from stone. You walk into a bonfire without being hurt. People start calling you the Unburnt. I mean, most of us would be shouting, I am a golden god by this time. I mean, you really do have to stop and think about what it would be like to go through that. For first, all the losses, and then the exhilaration of that miracle. So at the very least, one can identify with Dany, beginning to believe that becoming the mother of dragons is some kind of magical destiny for her. The big question as her plot progresses, of course, becomes the one that we're occupied with in these videos. What is her character, and what does that say about how she'll use the dragons? That's what we're trying to figure out. But this is the moment we can see in this book. Her sense of destiny is starting to come together, if you will. Comments?
This was one of the moments that I identified with Dany the most, because I lost 2 children. I've had 2 miscarriages. So this sense of like, you can't take what I have left. Like, you've taken plenty from me. That sense that she has of like feeling like the gods have stripped her of everything that she valued, and this is what she has left. And it's like, nope, nope, this is mine. And I'm going to like guard and protect and treasure what I have left, because this is what I have left after I have lost everything else. Like, that was the moment that I really started. I mean, I liked her before, but this was a moment that I really identified with in the books, because it made so much sense to me to be that fiercely protective of what little you have left, because it represents both tragedy and loss, but also like the potential for life in the future. It's
right.
Both of those things at once. So it has so much power, like for herself and like her self-conception, but also for the way that she thinks about her future. Like, what is her future without thinking about like, this is what she has to make a future out of, is like her Khalasar and her dragons. And she kind of like needs that to shape her vision for what her future is going to look like. Because this is
why it's very well said. Thank you for drawing on your personal experience and sort of framing that even a little better. And I think this is why it's so important for us to understand and notice in the first book that the idea of I am the dragon, it comes to Dany in the most trying moments. And she uses it for inner strength. It's during her wedding night. It's during all these, the most harrowing moments. That's when she thinks I am the dragon. Basically, like, it's all that she has left to draw from for strength. And then the dragons, when they're born, literally become, like you said, all she has left after everything else is gone. So this idea that dragons are her identity and her strength is being fortified from multiple directions. And we can see
Right.
that building as this goes along.
Right. It's a very Phoenix-like idea of
Very
like,
much, yes.
so much has been burned away and this is what has been reborn from the ashes. So she's going to cling to that and make her life about that, because this is the new life from the ashes of her old.
That's it. It's very Phoenix-like. I mean, it's exactly that. So, and now as they carry on through the waste, Dany's faith is tested, and this is still that first chapter of A Clash of Kings.
The comet mocks my hopes, she thought, lifting her eyes to where it scored the sky. Have I crossed half the world and seen the birth of dragons, only to die with them in this hard, hot desert? She would not believe it.
So the next day, they find the abandoned city of Whitestone that they call Base Teloro, which has a functioning well, fruit trees, and offers some respite to Dany's group. So once again, it seems like Dany is clinging to the idea of magical destiny because it's all she has, because it's a way to channel hope, and once again, it pays off. We should observe that for better or worse, every time she pulls through another impossible trial, her faith in her own destiny is basically strengthened, for better or worse. I mean, think how you act if you have like 3 funny coincidences in a day, right? You're basically freaking out and trying to buy like a lottery ticket. So multiply that many times, and you can see that the combination of tragedy and fortune and miracle that has been rapidly befalling Dany is shaping her sense of destiny and purpose as she goes. So here is a good passage where the dragons seem to inspire Dany. And this is sort of doesn't fit in with what we were just talking about, but it's a cool little sidebar because it's challenging our notion of what we should associate the dragons with, not just fire and blood and destruction. There's also a moment of wonder and reverie here inspired by the dragons.
Across the tent, Rhaegal unfolded green wings to flap and flutter a half foot before thumping to the carpet. When he landed, his tail lashed back and forth in fury, and he raised his head and screamed. If I had wings, I would want to fly too, Dany thought. The Targaryens of old had ridden upon dragonback when they went to war. She tried to imagine what it would feel like to straddle a dragon's neck and soar high into the air. It would be like standing on a mountaintop, only better. The whole world would be spread out below. If I flew high enough, I could even see the 7 kingdoms and reach up and touch the comet.
So as I often point out, dragons should not simply be associated with death and violence. You know, even as she's thinking about the fact that the Targaryens rode dragons, quote, to war, she's not actually thinking of burning her enemies or pecking their fat lips off like Arya was with Roose Bolton and Joffrey or whatever. She's thinking about flying whimsically high enough to see all of Westeros and touch the comet. I mean, it's a total never-ending story. I mean, it's like exhilarating and fantastical. And so this is what the dragons are making her think of. And I think that's interesting. George is tossing us these little clues that like there's more to dragons than just death and destruction. So
Green dragon in the sky. I can go twice as high.
Well, so the guy who sings that is called Limal, which is almost like LML, like sort of mumble it. It's kind of
take a look. It's in a book.
Anyways, okay. Oh yeah, so I mentioned that Roose Bolton quote, and in the notes I have it here to compare it to that Arya quote. So I'll just read it real quick. The heads had been dipped in tar to slow the rot. Every morning when Arya went to the well to draw fresh water for Roose Bolton's basin, she had to pass beneath them. They faced outward, so she never saw their faces, but she liked to pretend that one of them was Joffrey's. She tried to picture how his pretty face would look dipped in tar. If I was a crow, I could fly down and peck off his stupid, fat, pouty lips. So kind of funny, but also really scary. This is a 10-year-old, again, ideating about elaborate, like, gory revenge fantasies. So it's just worth comparing the kind of fantasies that are happening. Like Dany's sitting there looking at her dragons and thinking about retaking Westeros. She could very easily be picturing the fat head of the usurper and her dragon biting his head off or something, but she's not. That's not who she is at all. So just wanted to put that out. But we love Arya too, but Arya is going to be a mass murderer. So
Right.
this is what that looks like, you know.
Right. Arya has a terrifying headspace for a 10-year-old child. Like, it's uncomfortable. And I'm sure that's the point, because this is what happens to like children who are thrust into a war situation. Like, it's not that uncommon. She's a child soldier, but it's also terrifying to read of like a 10-year-old, like, dreaming of like, she dreams of eating all the people in Nymeria, and she wakes up and is like enjoying it. Like, yes, I ate them. And you're like,
this is why I always like to say that George writes fantasy by taking all the fantasy tropes and then asking like, what would this really look like with a real human being? And so we get all these stories about orphans that go through horrible circumstances and they come out, then they're the chosen one or the wizard or whatever. And it's like, no, that kind of stuff, like it has an effect on you and you've got to handle it one way or the other. We see Dany handling her trauma in a way that is very different from someone like Arya. And then there's also Sansa, who handles a lot of trauma in probably you'd say a third way that's different from either of Arya or Dany. So probably more comparable to Dany. I haven't thought about that all the way out. But point is, George is with Arya's arc, he's showing us what can happen when a child suffers just all kinds of unbelievable tragedy. This is what war looks like. War isn't just death and destruction. It's trauma. It's people's losing their childhood. It's, people turning into a killer. And of course, he's basically laying a trap for us as a reader, where we kind of want to root for Arya to be badass and kill all the bad guys, but we shouldn't neglect to notice the toll that it takes on her personality. So anyways, this little bit is, I'd say it's more foreshadowing than it is Dany considering her own destiny. But this is one of the ways that I think George is setting up Dany and Jon to be able to relate to and accept one another. So go ahead and read this quote.
Khal Drogo had been her sun and stars, her first, and perhaps he must be her last. The Magi Miri Mazdur had sworn that she would never bear a living child. And what man would want a barren wife? And what man could hope to rival Drogo, who had died with his hair uncut and rode now through the nightlands, the stars, his Khalasar?
So how about a man who has defeated death, who has gone to the nightlands and returned? How about Jon Snow, who will likely have no interest in making babies and whose glorious hair is also relatively uncut? Except for in the show where they cut his hair.
I was gonna make a joke about that. I was gonna be like, "Oh yeah, she wants a dude with uncut hair." Well, sorry, John. Like,
well,
got your magic haircut.
Really, she just did a little trim. I mean, she didn't really like give him bangs or anything. She should have given him like a Humperdinck haircut.
It's like a bowl cut. Like,
no. And I do think, of course, John's hair is going to go white and he's going to look all Elric of Melnibone and all that. But you can see what I'm saying here. I'm partially kidding with the hair joke, but Jon is dark and handsome, and that's probably not going to work against him. Dany does consider appearance. Jon is, he's cute and whatever. But the point is here, the personality. Okay, so one could easily ask, who could possibly be the equal of Queen Daenerys Targaryen, right? With her dragons and her trail of miracles and her magical destiny once she arrives in Westeros. And the answer is Jon. I mean, how about the first mingling of House Stark and the blood of the dragon in thousands of years? Perhaps he's probably a man whose very existence will be a miracle by the time he meets Dany, because he'll be resurrected. Who better to understand her sense of loss, to understand the price that she's paid to get this far than Jon Snow, who's lost more than his fair share of friends and family and loved ones along the way to losing his own life. Just as Dany lost Drogo, Jon also lost Ygritte, his first love, with each painfully and dramatically watching their loved one pass. I mean, I could go on, but I think you can see that there is ample setup for Jon and Dany to connect on more than just being the last two Targaryens in the world. So I thought that was cool. Yeah. Because it really is just like asking the question rhetorically, who could love me? What man could want me? Who could rival Drogo? It's like, well, resurrect Targaryens now.
I'm really glad he did shift over to like what man can rival Drogo, because I'm really tired of the like, oh no, a barren woman is the worst possible thing you could be, because it's like there's the joke that goes around of like, I have a terrible secret. Everyone hates me. It makes me the worst. I can't have babies. And like, I mean, it's really not that. I mean, I understand in their society that like a woman who can't have children probably would have been a pretty big deal, but I'm also glad that Martin doesn't like harp on it because it's frustrating.
And in the end, Jon ain't gonna care, I don't think. I mean,
he probably won't be able to like father children, so why does it matter?
I mean, as we've discussed, there is still the theoretical green seer resurrection that might be better than the ice or fire resurrection. So maybe Jon will still have flowing blood.
Erection.
I wasn't going to say erection, but yes, erections. We'll see. We'll see. But Beric's blood flowed not, says George, and vital processes had stopped. He's just a walking meat sack with a soul inhabited in it. So we don't know what's going to be with Jon, but like you said, you know, in our discussion, I don't think the point of Jon and Dany is going to be for them to have a kid. Like that was a little show plot line they did, but I really don't even think that's going to happen. Probably.
Right. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me that they would have a magic baby, because it does seem like Martin is going for like, this is the end of the Targaryen line. Like the Targaryens, like the dragons end here. And if the Targaryens, as you know, symbolic and metaphorical dragons have to end, like it makes sense that the last two scions of House Targaryen are both infertile and cannot have more children.
I'm laughing at Tubbs 1971 who says res erection.
That's what I said too.
Oh, well,
I said res erection, and then you were like, I wasn't going to say erection. You just misheard me. So Tubbs, yay! Great minds.
I only heard the erection part. What can I say? Says more about you than it does me. Okay. All right. So
no, it says more about your ears than it does about my mouth.
No, I was making the joke back at myself, but
okay.
So when Dany first reaches Qarth, we could stop talking about erections now. In her second chapter, Pyat Pri and Zarzo and Daxos are competing to win Dany's favor by promising all sorts of gifts, from extravagant. Oh Jesus! Now I can't. Now it's all double entendre. An extravagant crown to a visit to the Palace of the Undying.
You're welcome. It's my job.
What am I even talking about? Oh, yes. Okay, so magical destiny, and Dany's going to talk about conquering Westeros. So, yeah, go ahead and read this.
The only palace I desire is the Red Castle at King's Landing, my lord Pyat. Dany was wary of the warlock. The mage Ymir Mazdur had soured her on those who played at sorcery. And if the Great of Qarth would give me gifts, Zaro, let them give me ships and swords to win back what is rightfully mine.
So this is the first time that, since Drogo died at least, that Dany is speaking openly of conquering Westeros. She's still going to be thinking of the concept of home and longing for belonging, if you will. But we can see that the dream of retaking Westeros for House Targaryen has now fully transferred from Viserys onto Dany. That transfer was highlighted when Dany named Viserion. In fact, we just read that. She says she was naming the dragon after Viserys, despite his many flaws, so that, quote, his dragon will do what he could not, meaning retake Westeros. So to whatever extent Dany believes her birthing of dragons and survival against great odds is predestined or fated, she now seems to think that the purpose is for her to retake Westeros. Now, as I've said before, I see the idea of Dany doing that, especially using her dragons to retake Westeros, as a trap. It's a trap. Using dragons in an offensive war, I don't think can really be considered just in any sense. I mean, you can certainly argue that liberating slaves is just, because liberating slaves is always just. But the overarching message is that using dragons in war, you're basically just roasting people. And it's going to lead to mass civilian casualties. That's kind of the whole point of the Dance of the Dragons, if you will. I mean, one of the points that George is doing by putting the dance out, now before Dany comes to Westeros, is so we know what to expect when dragons go to war. Like, everyone dies, the dragons die. It's basically a horror show. So basically what I'm saying, taking Westeros with dragons is a little bit of a false prize. And as I mentioned, the Iron Throne basically symbolizes the false prize in the story. We're supposed to be, worried about the others, right? So this applies to Dany more than anyone, I think. She ultimately needs to turn her eyes from the Iron Throne to the others. So I expect that she'll either walk right up to the brink of disaster before realizing this, or perhaps She'll even take King's Landing, and she'll have a high civilian casualty count, and that will force Dany to change course. So it calls her to reflect, realize that she's erred, and that the true use for the dragons is to fight the others. I mean, this is all, again, I'm speculating here, but these are the themes that I see emerging. And I think that's why George is taking so much time to show us her character here in a lot of small ways and some big ways, is so that it makes sense when she eventually does the right thing. It's a very interesting conflict of the heart, really. On one hand, we've got Dany's search for home, which is now merged with the dream of retaking Westeros. And on the other, we have her deep empathy for her fellow human being, especially the weak and downtrodden, not to mention her kindness, thoughtfulness, tendency for self-reflection, wisdom, perceptiveness, and basic decency. So, you know, all the things they say about Hitler as a young man. Moving on. So I just got to throw that in.
Instead of the portrait of an artist at the young man, like portrait of a Hitler.
Portrait of a dragon Hitler as a young lady. Right. This is just what it looks like.
Yep. Empathy, kindness, you know, protecting people, all of the things that you expect from a future fascist. Just, you know, embracing other cultures, finding what's valuable about them, wanting to incorporate them into your family and home. I mean, fascists love all that. They just, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a little. Yeah, I mean. So not long after Dany reaches the respite of Xaro's mansion, there's a nice chunky passage full of Dany musing on what it would be like to conquer Westeros, what her dragons are for, and basically everything that we're discussing. Woo! So why don't you go ahead and read it?
When all the men had gone, her handmaid stripped off the travel-stained silk she wore, and Dany padded out to where the marble pool sat in the shade of a portico. The water was deliciously cool, and the pool was stocked with tiny golden fish that nibbled curiously at her skin and made her giggle. It felt good to close her eyes and float, knowing she could rest as long as she liked. She wondered whether Aegon's Red Keep had a pool like this, and fragrant gardens full of lavender and mint. It must, surely. Viserys always said the Seven Kingdoms were more beautiful than any other place in the world. The thought of home disquieted her. If her son and stars had lived, he would have led this Khalasar across the poison water and swept away her enemies. But his strength had left the world. Her blood riders remained, sworn to her for life, and skilled in slaughter, but only in the ways of the horse lords. The Dothraki sacked cities and plundered kingdoms. They did not rule them. Dany had no wish to reduce King's Landing to a blackened ruin full of unquiet ghosts. Excuse me. She had supped enough on tears. I want to make my kingdom beautiful, to fill it with fat men and pretty maids and laughing children. I want my people to smile when they see me ride by, the way Viserys said they smiled for my father. But before she could do that, she must conquer. The usurper will kill you, sure as sunrise, Mormont had said. Robert had slain her gallant brother Rhaegar, and one of his creatures had crossed the Dothraki Sea to poison her and her unborn son. They said Robert Baratheon was strong as a bull and fearless in battle, a man who loved nothing better than war. And with him stood the great lords her brother had named the usurper's dogs, cold-eyed Eddard Stark with his frozen heart, and the golden Lannisters, father and son, so rich, so powerful, so treacherous. How could she hope to overthrow such men? When Khal Drogo had lived, men trembled and made him gifts to stay his wrath. If they did not, he took their cities, wealth, and wives and all. But his Khalasar had been vast, while hers was meager. Her people had followed her across the red waste as she chased her comet, and would follow her across the poison water too. But they would not be enough. Even her dragons might not be enough. Viserys had believed that the realm would rise for its rightful king, but Viserys had been a fool, and fools believe in foolish things. Her doubts made her shiver. Suddenly the water felt cold to her, and the little fish pricking at her skin annoying. Dany stood and climbed from the pool. Eerie, she called. Jiki. As the handmaids toweled her dry and wrapped her in a sand-silk robe, Dany's thoughts went to the three who had sought her out in the City of Bones. The bleeding star led me to Qarth for a purpose. Here I will find what I need, if I have the strength to take what is offered, and the wisdom to avoid the traps and snares. If the gods mean for me to conquer, they will provide. They will send me a sign, and if not...
Well read. Thank you very much. That is a whale of a passage, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All kinds of goodies in there. So back at the beginning, going back to the beginning of the quote, she's relaxing in the pool. She's feeling safe for once, which means a lot to Dany, of course. She's thinking about how nice it would be, or how nice it was to know that she can rest for as long as she wants and just chill for a minute. And she doesn't get that very much. So she's getting a very small taste of home and safety, and it leads her to wonder if Westeros and King's Landing might not have such a safe place for her also. It's basically just more cross association between the concept of home and safety and retaking Westeros. Just like I said, it's kind of just woven through this whole book and the rest of her arc. And then comes this very important set of thoughts where Dany quickly realizes that had she and Drogo led a huge Khalasar to invade Westeros, the Dothraki love of sack and plunder would have been a problem. The line here that D&D didn't read is, Dany had no wish to reduce King's Landing into a blackened ruin full of unquiet ghosts. Sorry.
Maybe they just missed the no part. And we're like, oh, Dany had a wish to turn King's Landing into a blackened heap with unquiet ghosts. All right.
So wouldn't it be ironic if like she did the opposite of what she's always intended to do? That would just be like, okay. Anyway.
So shocking. Shocking, oh, man.
So, of course not. She doesn't want to. Anyway, so as I've said repeatedly, to the extent that Dany causes civilian casualties, I'm really having a problem with civilian today. If Dany causes civilian casualties in the process of retaking King's Landing, she will weep. She will gnash her teeth. She will feel sorrow. She will not willfully murder people. Look out upon the rubble and smile and say, yes, I have won. To the extent that she reduces parts of King's Landing to rubble, the Daenerys Targaryen on the pages of the books that we're reading here will look out and think, what have I done? Am I the mother of monsters? And that kind of thing. So to me, there's really a terrific story here to be written, either by Dany having just such a moment which catalyzes her to wield her dragons against the others, most likely laying her own life down in the cause, or by pulling back from the brink of such a tragedy at King's Landing and then heading north. So, like I said, I don't know how far it will go in the process of her conquest, but what I feel certain about is that there will at some point be this moment when she has to put down the quest for the Iron Throne and turn north. And that's going to be, my opinion, the last part of her journey. If she goes north, I don't think she's coming back. So, anyways.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we got a super chat from Pat Riley that says, but the bells.
Yeah, there's lots of good comments I've been catching on this. Everyone's piping up and piling on D&D. Open season at this point. You suck. So it's just right there, Dany had no wish to reduce King's Landing to a blackened ruin. Anyways. Another interesting thing to note here is the way that Dany is thinking about potential conquest of Westeros. She wants to make it a nice place full of happy people. But first, it must be essentially liberated from the usurper and his dogs. And as the books progress, and in A Dance with Dragons especially, Dany is slowly learning the truth of her own father's misrule and even hearing a bit about the honor of the Starks. So we'll have to see what her concept of Westeros needing liberation is by the time that she actually gets there. And I also mentioned that, Fagon will probably sit the Iron Throne by the time that Dany arrives. And he's supposed to be the Mummer's dragon cheered by crowds. So that means that he'll probably be popular. It won't be the detestable misrule of Cersei that Dany will be looking to replace by the time she gets there. It'll be popular Fagon sitting on the throne. And that's going to make it even more complicated. So like I said earlier, that's one of the reasons why we're documenting Dany's perceptiveness and her thoughtfulness, as well as her kindness and empathy, because she's going to need wisdom and judgment to see her way around and through this trap of retaking Westeros with blood and fire. In fact, she's thinking about hoping that she has the wisdom to avoid traps and snares in Qarth in this very passage. So you can see that George is developing this idea in her arc, that Dany has to navigate all these traps with wisdom and perceptiveness. Just like you were saying a minute ago, Gretchen, she's, very perceptive, and that's important. This is why I think it's important, because she's going to have to do, her plot is all going to come down to not being stuck on this idea of just conquering Westeros with the dragons and then I win. She's got to see past that. So I don't want to harp on it too much, but it's just really important. So, and then finally note that Dany's belief in magical destiny and fate is tempered with some amount of healthy uncertainty. She's putting it in the hands of the gods, if you will, when she's saying, well, if I'm destined to survive, then I will. And if not, then I won't, which is actually kind of zen. And she's also worrying that the dragons, even when larger, may not be enough to retake Westeros, and that Viserys was foolish for being overconfident. So again, her belief in destiny is not, as of yet, making her overconfident or foolish. I just want to point that out as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, typically it's if you're asking yourself if you're crazy, then you're probably not. So if she's asking herself, am I being foolish or overconfident, then at this point, she's probably not. That's one of the things I've always found so interesting about Dany is just how much she questions herself and questions her decisions. And that was what made not just her going crazy, but the way that D&D wrote her as being so certain that she's right in doing everything that she's doing just kind of feel wrong to me, because Dany has always been the kind of person who, even if she might speak strongly because she's trying to encourage her men or trying to encourage her Khalasar, trying to, show people that she's a strong person, deep down inside, she questions every decision that she makes.
Correct.
So the idea that Dany would be well, I'm right and literally everyone else is wrong and no one can make me question the fact that I am right is that's really not the kind of person. It would take Dany would have to become a completely different person in order to get to that place. And at this point,
there's not even time to do that. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Right. And if you do try to do that, then it looks like what the show did, where it just feels like it just doesn't feel right. So, this is the whole point of this entire project is a lot of us had the same feeling after season 8, that's not Dany. And then, so I'm rereading and looking here, and no, it's really not. Feels
sounds
good.
A lot more like Cersei than it does like Dany. Cersei would be very likely to be I am right and everyone else is wrong, and therefore I'm going to burn everyone because they're wrong and they deserve it.
And teaser for your Dance of the Dragons project, Rhaenyra at first appears to be the Dany parallel, but we figured out by talking about it, it's actually Cersei who is the Rhaenyra parallel more than anything else. So.
Yep. If you got a queen on the throne in King's Landing, half your queen on the throne in King's Landing who's kind of crazy and paranoid and literally has a son named Joffrey, you might be talking about Cersei. Parallel to Cersei, not necessarily Dany. So, yep.
Looking forward to that project, like I said. But all right, so we are now... Okay, so when she learns news of Robert's death while in Qarth from a Summer Island trading captain, we see an important aspect of Dany's concept of what it will mean to retake Westeros discussed. And that's the idea that bleeding Westeros needs Daenerys Targaryen to come to the rescue.
The boy sits the Iron Throne now, Ser Jorah said. King Joffrey reigns, Kuhurumo agreed, but the Lannisters rule. Robert's brothers have fled King's Landing. The talk is they mean to claim the crown, and the hand has fallen. Lord Stark, who is King Robert's friend, he has been seized for treason. Ned Stark a traitor? Jorah snorted. Not bloody likely. The long summer will come again before that one would besmirch his precious honor. What honor could he have? Dany said. He was a traitor to his true king, as were these Lannisters. It pleased her to hear that the usurper's dogs were fighting amongst themselves, though she was unsurprised. The same thing happened when her Drogo died, and his great Khalasar tore itself to pieces. My brother is dead as well, Viserys, who was the true king, she told the Summer Islander. Khal Drogo, my lord husband, killed him with a crown of molten gold. Would her brother have been any wiser had he known that the vengeance he had prayed for was so close at hand? Then I grieve for you, Dragon Mother, and for bleeding Westeros, bereft of its rightful king.
So the idea of a bleeding land and an oppressed populace is very convenient. It's a very convenient resolution, rather, to the potential tension between violent conquest and protecting people. If the people are suffering, then Dany's conquest of Westeros would seem largely justified. But I don't think that is where George is going with her story, because that would just be kind of easy and boring and simple, and there's not really a conflict there. The Iron Throne has always served as a symbol of the false prize, like I was saying. So, I think that's going to apply more to Dany than anyone else. So, situation in Westeros is changing all the time, mostly for the worse. But as I mentioned, it might be taking an upturn under King Fagon before Dany gets there. And let me just say, no, Fagon is not confirmed. He might be Trugon, or he might be the Pisswater Prince. We don't know. I just call him Fagon because everyone, he's probably Fagon, Blackfire, meaning, Fagon means, he's a Blackfire or Lyrio's son or something like that. But point is, I'm just referring to the character. I'm not dogmatic about it. If you think he's real, that's fine. And maybe he is. I think that Dany might not know if he's real or not, and it's going to end up killing him in war, and it's going to affect her as if she has killed a long-lost relative. And I think that's going to shape how she looks at Jon, potentially. There's a lot of interesting stuff Martin can do there, so we'll just have to see. But you Trugon truthers, you're cool with me. We're good. It's all right. So this to me, like I was saying, I think this will make sense if King's Landing is under the rule of Fagon and it's kind of going well and he's popular and maybe he's improved a couple things, because this will make Dany think twice about conquest and the potential anguish of potentially thinking that she's killed one of her only last relatives. So Dany is a Clash of Kings chapter, the second one, ends with a declaration of purpose that we definitely want to make note of.
Khaleesi, the knight said when they were alone, I should not speak so freely of your plans. If I were you, this man will spread the tale wherever he goes now. Let him, she said. Let the whole world know my purpose. The usurper is dead. What does it matter? Not every sailor's tale is true, Sir Jorah cautioned. And even if Robert be truly dead, his son rules in his place. This changes nothing, truly. This changes everything. Dany rose abruptly. Screeching, her dragons uncoiled and spread their wings. Drogon flapped and clawed up to the lintel over the archway. The others skittered across the floor, wingtips scrabbling on the marble. Before, the 7 kingdoms were like my Drogo's Khalasar, 100,000 made as one by his strength. Now they fly to pieces, even as the Khalasar did after my call lay dead. The High Lords have always fought. Tell me who's won, and I'll tell you what it means. Khaleesi, the 7 kingdoms are not going to fall into your hands like so many ripe peaches. You will need a fleet, gold, armies, alliances. All this I know. She took his hands in hers and looked up into his dark, suspicious eyes. Sometimes he thinks of me as a child he must protect, and sometimes as a woman he would like to bed. But does he ever truly see me as his queen? I am not the frightened girl you met in Pentos. I have only counted 15 name days true, but I am as old as the crones in the Dosh Khaleen, and as young as my dragons, Jorah. I have borne a child, burned a call, and crossed the Red Waste and the Dothraki Sea. Mine is the blood of the dragon. As was your brother's, he said stubbornly. I am not Viserys. No, he admitted. There's more of Rhaegar in you, I think, but even Rhaegar could be slain. Robert proved that on the Trident, with no more than a warhammer. Even dragons can die. Dragons die. She stood on her toes to kiss him lightly on an unshaven cheek. But so do dragon slayers.
So this is a really good example of the way... Sorry, I did the cough button there. This passage is a good example of the way that Dany blends confidence, determination, and sense of destiny with realism, caution, and wisdom. She's simultaneously expressing quiet confidence while also keeping Jorah's words in context based on her accurate assessment of his bias in this area. The way she handles Jorah throughout the book and the next is really skillful, to be honest. She sees his flaws and his desire for her very plainly, and she's angry with him at times, but still, like I said, listens to his advice and even asks him smart questions, knowing when to rely on him and how to factor in his bias. And, it's subtle, but this is someone Dany has no choice but to work with for the time being. And so she does the best that she can, and she does pretty well. And even more than Dany's determination, her loss of innocence is kind of what jumps out to me here. She's saying, hey, I may be 15, but I'm no child. Look at what I've been through. And it's certainly true that kids who face hard times do tend to grow up faster in certain ways. And Dany was basically left with no choice but to grow up fast, especially after Drogo died and leadership and the burden of survival fell solely on her. She had, like I said, she had to figure it out on the fly. So there was no longer anyone shielding her from anything, No Drogo, no Viserys, no Sir Willem Darry, no House with the Red Door, no Illyrio's Mansion, no huge Khalasar, no Grassy Sea. She's taken on the mantle of leadership with her ragged little band, and frankly, she's already doing a better job than most people with power that we see in A Song of Ice and Fire. So Dragon Slayers, it should be noted, can go straight to hell. If this is foreshadowing, I take it to mean that Dany will personally put an end to anyone who slays one of her dragons, be it Euron or a White Walker or Bronn's ragged ass. If that happens. I doubt it. Probably not. Okay, so, hey, Tubbs, I'm going to have to ask you to rein it in there, buddy, because when you're just saying Dany loves to hear the screams, that's not based on anything in the books. There's no time at which she loves to hear the screams. So I don't know if you're confusing book canon and show canon, but we're clearly here to talk about the book canon. So I feel like you're just antagonizing people. So please, chill. It's all good. And if you are going to argue, then at least come with examples from the books. I'm definitely not here to whitewash Dany, but she does not enjoy violence. She doesn't revel in it. There's not a single moment that happens. So I just had to say that. In any case, Dany's third chapter has her searching for help in Qarth, like we said. And this gives us the first taste of Dany speaking of vengeance. So again, we're not here to whitewash. We're looking at everything that she has to do with violence. And here she is talking about vengeance, which is a little different than defense. So let's check this passage out. Zara was trying to talk her out of retaking Westeros.
This iron throne you speak of sounds monstrous cold and hard. I cannot bear the thought of jagged barbs cutting your sweet skin. The jewels in Zara's nose gave him the aspect of some strange glittery bird. His long, elegant fingers waved dismissal. Let this be your kingdom, most exquisite of queens, and let me be your king. I will give you a throne of gold, if you like. When Qarth begins to pall, we can journey around Hiti and search for the dreaming city of the poets, to sip the wine of wisdom from a dead man's skull. I mean to sail to Westeros and drink the wine of vengeance from the skull of the usurper. She scratched Rhaegal under one eye, and his jade-green wings unfolded for a moment, stirring the still air in the palanquin.
So Dany does seem to have some level of personal animosity for Robert the Usurper. That's when we kind of see her get like a little angry in a way that's like, again, not purely about her children. And I think that's because the idea of the usurper has been associated with like the cause of her being on the run. Her entire life, they've been on the run, and Viserys just says, oh, because of the usurper, the usurper. So he essentially stands for her eviction from her home. And we know how important that is to her. So there's some personal animosity here. But at the same time, she's actually really just doing wordplay here. Like Zaro says, drink the wine of wisdom from a dead man's skull. And so she spins it around and says, well, I want to drink the wine of vengeance from Robert's skull. So she's not like frothing at the mouth. But nevertheless, like I said, I want to present everything that has to do with her use of violence and power. And so she is talking about vengeance here. And when we get to A Dance with Dragons, she does take specifically revenge. Like when she nails the slavers and crucifies them, that's revenge. You could call it justice, but she wrestles with it. She thinks, so I felt like an avenging dragon, but was this really justice? So there's definitely, we're meant to question that, just as Dany does.
Right. And there are a couple things like Robert. We have to remember Robert is also the one who tried to murder her unborn child. So it's not just animosity for Robert representing being kicked out of her home, but like Robert is specifically the king who sent the poisoner to try and kill her and her unborn baby. So I think that adds to the layer of very personal animosity, because for Dany, one of the worst things you can do, the way to get Dany fired up is to try and threaten one of her children, either literal or like analogical. Anyone she considers her child, if you threaten them, like that's how Dany gets pissed off. And he tried to kill her unborn baby. So also he's already dead at this point. So she's not like threatening to murder him. She's just saying like his skull would be like, again, the wordplay, and also he's already dead. So it's just like, I guess I'll desecrate his body. But I also have to say, for all the people who talk about making skulls into wine cups, I'm like, a skull would actually be a really shitty wine cup. People like too many holes. It's just gonna you're gonna spill everywhere, and there are better things to make into a wine cup than a human skull. That just seems weird.
Okay, I think I've spotted a troll. Bye-bye. Oh, I can. Oh, look at this.
What?
I can show comments.
Sweet. Yeah, that's a good. Ooh.
Hey, StreamYard.
Fancy,
Ooh,
fancy.
Wow.
Yeah, also that was a really good point, Guilty Undertaker. Good question. Do we think that Dany will ever learn that Ned tried to stop Robert? I don't know. I don't know who she would learn that from. I suppose Barristan could be someone who would tell her that. I'm trying to think of who else would be around that would know and be interested in telling her. I have no idea. Do you have any thoughts?
Telling her which? Telling her what?
Oh, whether that Ned tried to stop Robert from killing
Tyrion.
Oh.
And somebody pointed out that Tyrion suspects Fagon to be fake too. So it's possible he could tell Dany that as well.
Right. Yeah, he's got his doubts. That would be a person.
Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because Dany, her realization of how bad King Aerys was has been pretty slow rolled. Like George is mostly saving it. She's only heard a little bit about it from Barristan. I feel like Tyrion might dump that one in her lap, huh?
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, Tyrion's got a lot of juicy tidbits that he can drop in her lap about the past that she doesn't know. He could give her a lot of information that would help her to make decisions, or that he could use to try and manipulate her, because it wouldn't surprise me if he tries to pull with her what he's been doing with young Griff. Fagon. Yep.
Young Griff. Young Griff sounds all rugged.
It does sound like true grit.
Flip the chessboard over and throw a tantrum. You get to be Fagon. My name is Fagon. Right.
I was waiting for you to do that. When you mentioned Fagon earlier, I was like, counting down in my head, and you didn't do it, but you did it now. So
I'm carrying black steel. All right. So there's a little bit of vengeance talk. Now later in the 3rd chapter, Dany thinks about the possibility for the dragons to cause civilian casualties in Westeros, which is certainly noteworthy.
In the quiet of her chambers, Dany stripped off her finery and donned a loose robe of purple silk. Her dragons were hungry, so she chopped up a snake and charred the pieces over a brazier. They are growing, she realized as she watched them snap and squabble over the blackened flesh. They must weigh twice what they had in Vase Teloro. Even so, it would be years before they were large enough to take to war. And they must be trained as well, or they will lay my kingdom waste. For all her Targaryen blood, Dany had not the least idea of how to train a dragon.
So this kind of goes to what I was saying about the way that Dany will view the people of Westeros in King's Landing. She'll view them as her people. And to the extent that Dany imagines herself the rightful ruler of the 7 kingdoms, that means that she will take responsibility for the well-being of the people, just as she has for everyone that she's ever claimed to be under her protection. She's already thinking about how much violence might be involved in retaking Westeros, about how to wield weapons of war like the dragons or the Khalasar without decimating the land and its citizenry. So it's hard to imagine her transforming into the person that we saw on the show, who seems to care nothing for mass civilian. God damn it. It's hard to imagine her transforming into the person we saw on the show, who seems to care nothing for mass civilian casualties and wanton slaughter of innocents by the time that she takes King's Landing. Specifically, Dany thinks about the damage that dragons can cause pretty constantly through the 5 books that we have so far. Civilian.
Did you just say wonton slaughter?
I did. Like wonton soup.
Wonton soup. Wonton slaughter.
Yeah, wonton, sorry.
No, it was just funny to me because it conjured a very funny picture in my head of like
people throwing soup at each other.
Just like throwing like wontons at each other, like.
Well, it's kind of like the vision she saw of the Red Wedding, leg of lamb scepter, and
yeah. Instead of like throwing stones,
slaughter. Yeah, that's what that is. It's the Red Wedding is wonton slaughter.
Wontons.
After Jorah learns that Zara wants to marry Dany because she would be obligated to give him a dragon, like we said, on the wedding night due to the Qarthine marriage custom of gift giving, there's a funny line which sums up Dany's Qarthine arc, and it says, "Dany nibbled at an onion and reflected ruefully on the faithlessness of men." That's pretty much it. So, more to the point, Dany's concept of destiny and retaking Westeros. She discusses the reliability and loyalty of Illyrio and what they should do next, having seemingly struck out in Qarth as far as raising an army or fleet. So keep in mind that Dany is playing devil's advocate a bit here with Jorah, as she often does, to draw people out and test their arguments.
Oh my gosh. Harrison Grant Williams just said wonton slaughter, like chop suey.
He also said ain't gone earlier.
Ain't gone. You have great wordplay. You really, really do, Harrison Grant Williams. I enjoy your wordplay. Keep it up. Keep doing it.
Man. All right.
All right. Illyrio believes in no cause but Illyrio. Gluttons are greedy men as a rule, and magisters are devious. Illyrio Mopatis is both. What do you truly know of him? I know that he gave me my dragon eggs. He snorted. If he'd known they were like to hatch, he would have sat on them himself. That made her smile despite herself. Oh, I have no doubt of that, sir. I know Illyrio better than you think. I was a child when I left his manse in Pentos to wed my son in stars, but I was neither deaf nor blind, and I am no child now. Even if Illyrio is the friend you think him, the knight said stubbornly, he is not powerful enough to enthrone you by himself, no more than he could your brother. He is rich, she said. Not so rich as Zaro, perhaps, but rich enough to hire ships for me, and men as well. Sellswords have their uses, Sir Jorah admitted, but you will not win your father's throne with sweepings from the free cities. Nothing knits a broken realm together so quick as an invading army on its soil. I am their rightful queen, Dany protested. You are a stranger who means to land on their shores with an army of outlanders who cannot even speak the common tongue. The lords of Westeros do not know you and have every reason to fear and mistrust you. You must win them over before you sail, a few at least. And how am I to do that if I go east as you counsel? He ate an olive and spit out the pit into his palm. I do not know, your grace, he admitted, but I do know that the longer you remain in place, the easier it will be for your enemies to find you. The name Targaryen still frightens them, so much so that they sent a man to murder you when they heard you were with child. What will they do when they learn of your dragons? Drogon was curled beneath her arm, as hot as a stone that has soaked all day in the blazing sun. Rhaegal and Viserion were fighting over a scrap of meat, buffeting each other with their wings as smoke hissed from their nostrils. My furious children, she thought. They must not come to harm. The comet led me to Qarth for a reason. I had hoped to find my army here, but it seems that will not be. What else remains, I ask myself. I am afraid, she realized, but I must be brave. Come the morrow, you must go to Pyat Pri. You're muted. You are muted.
Thank you. I was saying thank you. Very well read. And it's okay. Jorah and Dany, they'll come back to this discussion in the first A Storm of Swords chapter when they decide to change course and sail Illyrio's ships to Slaver's Bay instead of Pentos. We'll talk about that next time when we talk Storm of Swords. But it is interesting to note that this question of being accepted in Westeros is being raised at this early point in her story, and it goes along with all the other thinking she does about what Conquest of Westeros really means. And the other thing is that she's shifting her goal of what she can accomplish in Qarth. Having realized there's no army or fleet here, she's instead seeking magical guidance as to her destiny, essentially. That's why she goes to the Warlocks, because although she knows she can't trust them, she recognizes that they have magical power and knowledge, and knows that she needs some of that too, in addition to an army. She's pretty open to mysticism at this point in her life, having had prophetic visions and performed miracles herself. That would make you a believer. And of course, having seen the power of Miri Mazdur. Dany trusts herself to navigate the hazards of untrustworthy people the entire time she's in Qarth, and she does so once again with the Warlocks. Good thing she brings Drogon with her. We probably have to call that good judgment on her part. Lock up your wolf, get assassinated. Keep your dragon close, burn Warlocks. That's the lesson here, clearly. Hey, D. Villano. How you doing there, D? See, someone does a super chat, and I can put it on the screen. Look how cool that is. Mm-hmm. What do the commoners of Westeros think of Targaryens? Well, that's a good question. They've not. I mean, it's all over the map. It seems like it's a mixed bag. You know, a lot of people don't like Aerys, but people thought highly of Rhaegar, and people can remember Jaehaerys. So I'd say that it's probably a pretty mixed bag. The idea that Fagon's going to be cheered by crowds indicates that it is possible for a Targaryen to be popular, at the end of the day, I think Jorah's right. The people don't really care. It's all about their well-being. Like, if things are getting better, then fine. It's a Targaryen, like whatever, you know. It's all about rain and bread and stuff.
Right. Where is that? Oh gosh. I feel like that's mentioned somewhere, either in Dunk and Egg or in the actual books, where someone has that kind of comment about how like the small folk don't really care.
It's Jorah in A Game of Thrones. We actually read it last time.
Oh yeah, that's right. I knew it was
the common people, they don't care. They pray for rain and so.
Right.
All right, so Dany's fifth and final chapter has her assessing the aftermath of burning the House of the Undying and generally striking out in Qarth. And Dany once more ponders her destiny and future path. And it looks like just this next paragraph here.
It was not by choice that she sought the waterfront. She was fleeing again. Her whole life had been one long flight, it seemed. She had been running in her mother's womb and never once stopped. How often had she and Viserys stolen away in the black of night, a bare step ahead of the usurper's hired knives? But it was run or die. Xaro had learned that Pyat Pri was gathering the surviving warlocks together to work ill on her.
So another thing to note here is that she's chewing on the prophecies of the Undying. She's thinking about the three treasons, that the first traitor was surely Miri Mazdur, who had murdered Khal Drogo and their unborn son to avenge her people. Could Pyat Pri and Zarzo and Daxos be the second and third? She decides they probably are not, but then goes on to consider all the other threes that were spoken of, thinking, Child of Three, they had called her. Daughter of Death, Slayer of Lies, Bride of Fire. She's pondering the meaning of the three heads has the dragon, and then this leads to a conversation with Jorah about Aegon having two other dragon riders when he conquered Westeros. She runs through some of the other bits, even explaining to Jorah that a mummer's dragon is a cloth dragon on poles used by mummers in their follies, and eventually lands on the vision of Rhaegar. She even asks Jorah, what is the Song of Ice and Fire? Which is kind of almost fourth wall breaking, but still kind of fun. And he says, no song I've ever heard. So all this is notable simply for the fact that she's trying to understand these prophecies as she does Quaith's cryptic advice. Dany ultimately needs to understand prophecy and magic in order to fulfill her destiny of taking the fight to the others, I think. If you're going to imagine yourself the chosen instrument of destiny, it's good to be thoughtful, cautious, considerate, and so on. Hold on, I gotta mute this. All right, there we go. So this trait that she has of pausing to consider may come in handy when that moment I was talking about comes, that she's got to see through the trap of trying to use her dragons to conquer Westeros, as opposed to going north. This kind of reflection that we see here might cause her to have that aha moment when she realizes that her purpose lies north at the wall, battling enemies armored in ice alongside her blue rose friend, Jon Snow.
Yeah. It's interesting that once again, because we see this a lot, where Dany and Jon, I think, are going to be, their main foil is going to be Aegon in the coming books. Because what you just said about like being thoughtful, cautious, and considerate if you imagine yourself the chosen instrument of destiny. And like, that is the opposite of Aegon. Like, Aegon was raised to like have totally internalized that and be self-important and arrogant and think really highly of himself. Like, oh yes, I am the true heir of, Westeros. And I'm, this is my destiny and this is my birthright. Right. And then you have both Jon and Dany who are also, claimants or heirs to the Targaryen throne. And yet neither one of them was raised with this kind of mentality. Both of them were kind of raised as outcasts and not really having a place to belong. And Aegon nominally was, but didn't actually internalize that kind of mindset that we see both Jon and Dany have, that like what makes them a good leader is the choices that they make to protect their people, and not because like they deserve it. Like Dany believes in magical destiny, but she believes that her magical destiny has to be like, she has to do something to prove herself in some sense, like worthy of her magical destiny, rather than just embracing it as like, oh yes, well I can do whatever I want because I'm the true queen and the red comet told me so, and I've got dragons, and so I can just do whatever. Like it makes her more thoughtful and reflective rather than less, which I think we see with someone like Aegon.
Flips the chessboard over. Pick up my pieces, dwarf. I am very unhappy.
That is kind of the voice. He sounds very petulant in my head.
Kind
of like Joffrey does. Just kind of like they just have this whiny, like,
Good call. Good call. So Dany's last A Clash of Kings chapter closes with the Barristan and Belwas scene when they arrive in Qarth. They foil the Manticore. They also deliver to Dany news that Illyrio has sent her 3 ships. The plan is to take her to Pentos and then Westeros. And I'm actually going to skim through this one. It's super long. We don't actually need to read all of it. So they basically say, we were told to find you and bring you back to Pentos. The 7 kingdoms have need of you. Robert the Usurper is dead and the realm bleeds. When we set sail from Pentos, there were 4 kings in the land and no justice to be had. So joy bloomed in her heart. Dany kept it from her face. I have 3 dragons and more than 100 in my Khalasar. And they're like, don't worry. The fat man hired 3 ships for his little silver hair queen. That's Belwas there with that. And Arstan confirms, they've got 3 cogs anchored in the harbor there, which is where they're walking around on the docks. Dany thinks, 3 heads has the dragon, wondering, hey, look, 3. She's thinking of all the prophecies, right before this happens. So then she says, I shall tell my people to make ready to depart at once, but the ships that bring me home must bear different names. As you wish. What names would you prefer? Vagar, Meraxes, and Balerion. Paint the names on their hulls in golden letters 3 feet high. I want every man to see them to know the dragons are returned. So once again, we see George giving us the familiar elements that make up Dany's evolving sense of what it means, what her destiny is. We've got her draconic identity, the people of bleeding Westeros being in need of justice, and the idea that Westeros represents the fulfillment of Dany's quest for home and belonging. Dany's thinking here is we can follow it. So it's like 3 heads has the dragon, 3 dragons have I, and now 3 ships have I. Westeros has 4 feuding kings and no justice, which, by the way, is a callback to the House of the Undying, where we see 4 rat-faced dwarves ravaging the woman who represents Westeros. And she just saw that vision and is thinking about those visions. So then Dany starts, as she, and actually a side point here, and tell me what you think about this, Gretchen. I just sort of jammed this in last night as I was doing the review of the script. But I think about the fact that the woman that is being attacked by the dwarves that represents Westeros is a woman, because Dany started her string of adopting and protecting people as her children by protecting women that were suffering violence specifically. And so then we have this idea that the land of Westeros is a woman suffering violence. Like this is really, this kind of resonate with her, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
And to tie into the question about mother goddesses and Dany representing like uprising, wrath of nature, revenge against cruelty, like it kind of works, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. The land is frequently feminine, especially in like mother goddess cultures. Like the land is personified as feminine. So it makes perfect sense that like, yeah, I really, really like that, especially of her protecting, a woman being ravaged by violence, because we saw in all of like in a bunch of the quotes I just read about how she's talking about how all of the usurpers' dogs are scattering and they're like pecking at and like, like clawing at or like gnawing at Westeros. So we already have this image that like she's thinking of Westeros as being something that's being like pecked at and ripped and torn at by dogs, the usurpers' dogs or crows. I mean, that's the whole idea of the feast for crows, is the land itself is the feast for the crows.
Right.
So Dany's already thinking in that way. And so, yeah, if you add in the House of the Undying vision, like, yeah, totally. I love that. So
I guess if you want to say like, what's the point of Dany's mother goddess stuff? Well, there's lots of points, but if as Harrison Grand Williams is saying, if this is basically a portrayal of Mother Gaia as the land that's suffering, Dany makes a very good avatar for a defender of that. Yep. So perhaps that's what we're going to see. Certainly, if she takes her dragons to fight the others, then we can see that. And
she's really strongly associated with land. Like, think about the fact that, I mean, growing up among the Dothraki, like her first articles of clothing that we see her wear, other than the silks at her wedding, are like leather and the lion pelt. Like she's got a lot of nature imagery associated with her, especially in her early chapters. Like literally wearing fabrics that are made from, I mean, cotton and silk are too, but like leather has a much more visceral, we think of leather as being much more like primal if you want to put it that way. It's closer to the land than, you know, wearing like hand-dyed silks and things.
There's a lot of flowers in her storyline too. If flowers are used almost like Sansa's dresses are, as a convenient symbolic sort of foil, Dany's always doing stuff with flowers. So there might be something to look at there.
Right. There might be some, some like nature goddess. I was immediately thinking of like Demeter and Persephone. Persephone is a goddess of spring, and I think she has a flower crown. But yeah, that idea of, flowers. Good. Awesome. I love that.
Cool. Right on. Well, that is pretty much it. And we're obviously over 2 hours here, so we've got a good long thing. I do have the Undying Visions here at the end, and I'm trying to look here and see what it was that there was like one or two things really that I wanted to mention. That was about it. So the first two visions are the woman with the rat dwarves, you know, attacking her. The second one is the Red Wedding. So I noticed both of those are communicating the message that Westeros is in chaos, the people, it's bleeding realm. So it's just another point on that. It's a theme that's running through, because again, it's very convenient for Dany to believe that she needs to help everybody, you know, from all this war. And there may be some truth to that, but that also may be a little bit of a trick too. So we have to follow that train of thought. The other one is, let's see. There's a reminder of her sense of home, because if you remember, she sees the house with the red door in Bravos with the lemon tree. She sees Sir Willem saying something, "Not little princess, there you are." And she's thinking about how warm and nice he is. But then she remembers that he's dead. So it's basically just a reminder of home and where she comes from. Then she sees a scene of the Mad King, her father, which she doesn't really understand at the moment, but I assume will come back to her mind later as she's told stories of the Mad King. She sees him in the throne room saying, "Let him be the king of ashes. Let him be king over charred bones and cooked meat," which is an allusion to the caches of wildfire. So there could be a little foreshadowing. You know, Drogon shrieks right after that line about "let him be the king of ashes." So perhaps this is foreshadowing that, because it works as a portrayal of like Dany coming into conflict with her dad's legacy. It's something she's going to have to confront, is the misrule of her father. So setting off the wildfire caches accidentally is kind of like personification of that, isn't it?
Yep. Which is why I love and would prefer it to be accidental, because there's so much more potential for internal conflict, the human heart and conflict, when she didn't do it on purpose, but she still, in some sense, like accidentally fulfilled her father's dying wish, but not on purpose. And that's going to make her like really, if that's what happens, she's gonna, it would be like Hosea times a million.
And probably, I think she'll be viewed negatively. People might call her the Mad Queen. And that, again, you could see these working to catalyze her to figure out, like, what do I really have to do? You know, I thought this was my destiny. And then along comes Jon Snow. Well, actually, there's these ice demons that really could use melting. And she's like, oh, yes, that dream of melting people with dragons. I remember that. They weren't people. They were ice people.
Right, because she's already questioning. We see her at a dance with dragons, already starting to question, like, are dragons good for anything? That's the whole reason she changed them up in the pyramids, is because she's starting to question whether or not dragons can actually have a good use in the world. And along comes Jon to be like, hey, I got one for you. There's a giant army of dead ice people. And you know what burns really well? Dead bodies, and ice melts. So
I really didn't buy the whole like Night King isn't burned by dragon fire. It's like, what's the bloody point then? Like, but Guilty Undertaker says it's also a warning of the path she could tread if she's not careful. So obviously it is that. And right after the vision of Ares, she sees the vision of Rhaegar, which is giving you the little bit of the double-sided coin, you know, the madness and the not madness, if you will. But Rhaegar could be seen as a different kind of temptation also, another kind of path that she can follow, because Rhaegar was thinking about prophecy, it seems like, exclusively when he made his decisions. And ultimately he misread something and led to his doom. And maybe that's what we needed to fulfill the prophecy down the line or whatever. But point is, there's also a snare there for her to like buy too much into her own destiny. You get a sense that Rhaegar may have done that.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it seems pretty clear that he believed his own hype or his own self-perceived
warrior
hype.
because it turns out I'm in this book of prophecy here. It's not talking about me. Yeah, so.
Yeah, totally about me. Like if you're going to go into a book of prophecy and assume it's about you, I feel like that says more about you than it does about prophecy.
So then we've got, let's see here. And the other part about that is that the vision she sees of Rhaegar is with Elia holding baby Aegon, saying his is a song of ice and fire, but 3 heads has the dragon, there should be one more. So we're introducing this idea that she's going to think of Fagon as her kin, and there's a connection being drawn. Like she's seeing her brother with a baby, and so when she hears about Fagon later, she'll think of this vision, and she'll feel connected to it. So that's the other thing that's happening here. I think that one's going to be tragic because Fagon's not. I have wondered if maybe like Fagon is before we knew about King Bran. It's like, well, maybe Fagon just is the king, and that'll be funny. Like he's not the real destined one, but he gets to be king, and Dany and Jon have to go do the magic stuff. But it's going to be King Bran. So, all right. Then we have the splendor of wizards, the fake great empire of the dawn, gemstones, speckled hats, or pointy hats speckled with stars. All music, surpassing loveliness, a perfect Qarthian breast. As perfect as a breast could be, all this stuff. And they're promising to teach her the language of dragons and saying that we sent the comet 1,000 years ago to show you the way. We've been waiting all this time. So it's the Undying's biggest temptation for Dany. But she is, the point I want to make here is that she's not so entranced by it that she doesn't notice the hidden door behind the open door. And this again is Dany almost walking into a trap and then going, wait a minute, and sidestepping and
it's a trap
and taking the right, it's a trap, and then taking the right path. So again and again, George is showing us Dany's ability to navigate snares and tricks and come through on the other side, even if she does need a little help from Drogon once in a while. That's okay.
Yeah. I was just thinking earlier that, me quoting Star Wars reminded me that like elements of the House of the Undying vision kind of remind me of both Luke and Rey's like cave visions, especially the like Vader Luke, because was it Guilty Undertaker who was saying that like it's a warning against what she could become, which is what, when Luke goes into the cave in Empire Strikes Back and he sees like himself as Vader, it's a vision warning him that like he could be tempted to fall to the dark side. Like he could become another Vader if he's not careful. So yeah, her seeing Mad King Aerys and even Rhaegar is like, this is what you could be. If you're not careful, you could, believe your own hype and, be chasing down prophecies so much that you're kind of heedless to the current events around you and what that means for the kingdom. You could forget the kingdom for the sake of a prophecy, or you could, go mad with power and, decide that because you have dragons and, presume yourself to be the rightful heir, that you have the right to just, burn people and do whatever you want. Like I think you're right that those are both potentially dangerous paths for Dany, because she could be set up to go down either one of them. And like people think about her going mad, mad king, but it is interesting that you point out that Rhaegar is another form of temptation for her, of like being so fixated on prophecy, because that's what Rhaegar did. I think he got so fixated on the prophecy, he didn't stop to think about what was actually going on in Westeros at the time and whether or not what he was doing was wise, or if there would be implications, or, so that's interesting. I like that point.
So D. Villano says, I get by with a little help from my dragons. Oh, I get high with a little help from my dragons. Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Definitely fly really high.
Okay, so
I thought earlier there was a quote I read that said her life had been one long flight, and I was like, hey, dragon joke.
I can't wait to do a Q&A now that I know I can do this thing with the comments. This is going to be fun.
That's awesome.
Going to make Q&As a little more fun. All right, and then so just what you were saying as far as Rhaegar and Mad King Aerys representing false paths, we also see a shout out to Rhaego after Dany navigates to the real Undying, the blue husk ghosts and the blue heart and all that, she gets a bombardment of images there. And I'm just going to read this paragraph, or at least the first part of it. Then phantoms shivered through the murk, images in indigo. Viserys screamed as the molten gold ran down his cheeks and filled his mouth. A tall lord with copper skin and silver gold hair stood beneath the banner of a fiery stallion, a burning city behind him. Rubies flew like drops of blood from the chest of a dying prince, and he sank to his knees in the water and with his last breath murmured a woman's name. So that was a triplet. It was Viserys, Rhaego, and Rhaegar. And those are 3 failed dragons. 3 people that could have been the last dragon but weren't. And instead it's going to be Dany. So we should think about those 3 failures. Viserys was a fool. Rhaegar, we talked about. Rhaego, the stallion that mounts the world, his whole future identity was wrapped around burning cities. He was going to be the dragon Khal who couldn't be stopped and would conquer the world. That was what the prophecy was. And think of Drogo declaring that he's going to rape everyone and tear down the stone houses. Like that's the Dothraki idea of conquest. So that's what Rhaego represents, and that's why we see a burning city behind him. This is a path that Dany doesn't want to go down. This is another example of that. So then we see, glowing like a sunset, a red sword was raised in the hand of a blue-eyed king who cast no shadow. Hi, Stannis. The cloth dragon swayed on poles amidst a cheering crowd. Hi, Fagon. My name is Fagon. From a smoking tower, a great stone beast took wing, breathing shadow fire. Hello, Euron. This is my idea now. We used to think that this was another Fagon line because the smoking tower and a great stone beast. The great stone beast could be the grayscale John Con or whatever. But I think smoking tower is allusion to High Tower and Old Town and whatever horrible magic. I think, this could be, it could be Euron calling the dragon to him with the horn magic somehow, or it could be some, I don't even want to go, but I think that's a Euron line. So these are 3 people she's going to have to contend with: Stannis, Fagon, and Euron. These are also 3 false Azor High people: Stannis, Fagon, and Euron. So there's that. And then the last bit: her silver was trotting through the grass to a darkling stream beneath a sea of stars. Shout out to her past. A corpse stood at the prow of a ship, eyes bright in his dead face, gray lips smiling sadly. So here comes the Greyjoys. And then a blue flower grew from a chink in a wall of ice and filled the air with sweetness. So that's like her journey, starting with the Dothraki Sea, the trip back to Westeros with the Greyjoys, and then meeting Jon. The blue flower grew from a chink in a wall of ice and filled the air with sweetness. And that again tells me that is the conclusion of Dany's arc at the wall against the others with Jon. So that's how I read that. And well, you want to pipe in?
Yeah. I mean, I love the Euron I really like Euron as that third image because it never made as much, I don't know, it just felt weird to have 2 Fagon references in this, like, in order, because it seems like the images do provide you with 3 different things that you're supposed to see, 3 different things at once. Martin's pretty good at being consistent about that. So I really like that. And of course, I'm a huge fan of, you and I have talked a lot about Euron and what we think Euron is doing and where it's going, and Dany being the one to contend against Euron and what that looks like is pretty exciting. Who was it? Maud Mary spoke up in the chat and said the dragon has 3 failed heads, which I like as a response to your, like, the 3 failed heads of the dragon and the 3 different Azor Ahai people, which are kind of they're 2 different ways of saying almost the same thing, because the head of the dragon being an Azor Ahai figure, like the usurping king, because that's the thing that all of those have in common as well. Stannis or like the usurpation is part of it, is part of that king archetype there. I've lost my train of thought. So
yeah, I got distracted by the Rhaego thirst that's going on here.
Yeah.
Now if you type something funny in the chat, I can put you on the spot. This is great.
He would be hot. Like, the description of him is like, yeah, dragon people are pretty. And also he like imagine Jason Momoa, but wearing like the Witcher wig.
Don't get me started with The Witcher, all right? Because I will go through my entire Twitter timeline and screen share all of my Rhaegar at The Witcher memes, which slay, by the way, if you don't follow me on Twitter. So
They're really good. I enjoy them.
So the last bit of the Undying thing that's important is this sequence of basically mostly stuff that already happened to her. Shadows whirling inside the Miri Mazdur tent. Little girl running towards a big house with a red door. Miri Mazdur shrieking in the flames. A dragon bursting from her brow, which is Kali symbolism specifically, by the way. The dragging this silver horse dragging the bloody corpse of a man. That's the wine cellar. A white lion running through the grass taller than a man. That's the Harakar, maybe a reference to Tyrion. Beneath the mother of mountains, a line of naked crones crept from a great lake and knelt shivering. That is the one prophecy that's in here, like a future event. But I think that it's in here because this is the Dothraki Sea plot basically coming back around. So listing a bunch of stuff that happened to the Dothraki Sea and then the capstone event that hasn't happened yet. Then it says, 10,000 slaves lifted blood-stained hands as she raced by on her silver, riding like the wind. Mother, they cried, mother, mother. They were reaching for her, touching her, tugging at her cloak, the hem of her skirt, her foot, her leg, her breast. They wanted her, needed her, the fire, the life. And Dany gasped and opened her arms to give herself to them. So that is a good place to stop because it kind of encapsulates a lot of things. The very concept of Dany's idea of leadership means you give yourself to the people. And that is what we see her doing over and over and over. This is not somebody who believes they have the right to rule because it's theirs. You know, to the extent that she believes that it's her destiny to rule, this is what it means. It means opening herself up and giving everything she has. Probably also a clue that her fate will be a self-sacrifice at the end. You know, her fire and her life is being requested here. And guess what happens right after this? Drogon, of course, burns the undying others to a crisp. And I call them undying others because they're described as cold blue shadows, and they're gathered around a cold blue heart, which seems like a model for the heart of winter, and the others, which are cold shadows. And then we have Drogon burning them all. So this kind of just shows you Dany. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the bloody hands. Like, totally made me think of Dany freeing the whites, which is something that, like, we've talked about, that, like, Dany is she's the breaker of chains, she's the free of slaves, and that the final slaves that she's going to free are the whites that are being enslaved by the others. And talking about, like, all of the people with their bloody hands, like the bloody hand trees and the weirwoods, like, I was like, oh, that's weirwood symbolism. Like, you've got the people who are being, like, tied to the weirwoods who are also slaves, like, screaming mother and, like, touching her, and, like, feels very much like Dany sacrificing herself to free, you know, to destroy the others and free the enslaved whites so that their spirits can pass on or whatever happens after that.
1,000 bloodstained hands is the very first description we get of the weirwood leaves when we first see the weirwood tree in the Winterfell Godswood. So it's definitely weirwood symbolism. And you're right, it's also related to the whole idea of the whites who have bloody hands, who are, you know, I've said before that these will be, if she's freeing slaves all the way, the climax of that arc will be freeing the whites. And I'm actually going to harp on that more, I think, in the last, in a future Dany thing. We're going to talk about the more mythical foreshadowing in context of, like, the plot ideas that we have. So, but yeah, it could be a hint that there's going to be some sort of weirwood element. But I think that's probably just what you said, the fact that the whites and the others are tied to the weirwoods. And to the extent that she's giving her fire up and then using Drogon to burn the others, that's kind of the same idea. Like, that's how you free the whites. It's going to involve the destruction of the others. So you can see her destiny right here in the House of the Undying.
And it's not going crazy and burning King's Landing.
No, it's not. It's not. It's really not. It's not. People. Brynden Clownfish. It's not. It's not. It's not in the books. It's not predestined. Not going to happen. I really am so ready for the reverse justification attempts to say that the show ending is foreshadowed in the books to stop. And that's kind of what we're doing here. I mean, I don't want to stop. I mean, we should have the debate, I guess, but I'm just saying this is my answer to that argument. Like, if you're saying that the books foreshadow what we saw on the TV show, I'm saying that you haven't read Dany's chapters very closely. That's where I mean, you can see what's here as we read it. We're going kind of slow, and we're being methodical because I really want to get it all. I want to point out all of these scenes. And yeah, I guess I should get off my soapbox. Save me.
Yeah. Guilty Undertaker just brought up his dark materials and Lyra freeing the dead to pass into everything, which that was something that I've been thinking of with Dany as being like the one who frees the souls that will pass on into the afterlife. Because when you think about the whites, like, or even the undead characters that we know, like they are in some sense enslaved and trapped. They're not free. Like Lady Cat, you can't say that Lady Stoneheart is in any way like a free entity.
No.
What she needs is to like be allowed to die and pass on. And that I think is what the whites need, is to be like freed from their like eternal slavery as like flesh puppets, and you know, for whatever is left of the human beings that were inside before to be released and passed on.
It's just gonna make so much sense. Breaker of chains, you know,
right?
Slayer of lies.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways,
yeah, because there's a lot of like the weirwoods trapping. Like there's a lot of like trap imagery associated with the weirwoods, and like the maesters as well is another good parallel, because the maesters are like gray rats, but they wear chains, and so they're like slaves to their office as well. And
there's a lot of thraldom, slavery, bondage themes, and the breaker of chains is such an important part of her identity and what she does. That yeah, I think it's again, it's the whole like, so am I freeing the people of Westeros by taking the throne? And it's like, well, no, I'm saving the people of Westeros by defeating the others. And on top of that, there'll be extra, freeing of the slave symbolism when she ends the threat of the whites and lets their souls go on to rest in the afterlife or whatever. So there it is.
Yeah. Sorry, folks. Spoiler warning for his dark materials. Sorry. I mean, they've been out for a long time, so I feel like if you haven't read them and you don't know how it ends, then
that's the kind of thing you like will quickly, you don't remember if you don't know the whole plot and stuff. I already forgot whatever it was you said, so.
Oh, well, thank you. You already forgot whatever.
Standard. Oh, I didn't mean it that way. Oh gosh, come on.
I know. I'm just
no, but I do probably a good place to stop and say thank you for joining me. Appreciate it very much. You specifically, Gretchen, and everyone else, but I was talking to you.
Oh, well, thank you. This was fun. I enjoyed it. Chat is always great.
Yeah, Melanie Roth7's been, she's like, kind of like to get, come on, I want to miss the action. So I'll get Melanie on here soon.
Yes.
Now that I have powers of having more than one people on at the same time. So,
yay.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you for joining me. And like I said, if you missed it, we did the first one called It Pleases Me to Hold Them Safe. And that was the Game of Thrones Dany chapters. This is a Clash of Kings. In 2 weeks, we'll do Storm of Swords. And then 2 weeks later, we'll do A Dance with Dragons. And then I might do one more for like just all the magical foreshadowing and some of the other stuff. So we're going strong every other week for a few more weeks. And yeah, so that's what you have to look forward to. I'm having a ton of fun. Hope you guys had fun. Thank you for joining me. Thank you, Gretchen. Do you want to plug your plugs?
Oh, plug my plugs. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter as at GNJonesWriter. I am on YouTube as Baal the Bard. And yes, I'm going to be talking about Dance with Dragons things. I'm very excited to be diving into that. My article about Ray and Dany is, I believe that what we're doing now on the Fandomentals is that it's going to be subscriber only for the first month or two. Probably for a month, it will be subscriber content. So for like $3 a month, you can come and read it. And then eventually it will become open to the public. But I'm going to be talking about Ray and Dany. And I mean, that's what I'm doing and hanging out here.
Cool. And there's the link.
Yes.
So you can go check out all kinds of good stuff there. And I just recorded with your...
Yes, we just had Kylie and Julia, if people are familiar with Unabashed Book Snobbery. They are, Kylie and Julia are my fellow editors over at the Fandomentals. And the two of them and I have a podcast called The Fandomentalist. And we just had LML on to talk about The Rise of Skywalker.
and we had lots of fun. We did a little script doctoring. We came up with the whole thing of Stormtrooper Rebellion. And
oh man, I'm so sad that we didn't get Finn's Stormtrooper Rebellion. That just like would have been so good, so good.
There it is. And let's see. Thank you, Maud Mary. Appreciate it. That's a raging picture, Maud Mary. That's awesome.
Oh yeah, I like it.
You look like a fun person. All right, that's enough embarrassing people. But thank you, and yeah, we will see you in 2 weeks. Go Vikings!
I don't watch sports ball. Bye.